Chapter 1301. In the laboratory in the center of Beihai prison, almost everyone went completely crazy. Almost fanatical emotions permeated from everyone's eyes. Everyone could feel the surprise and excitement in each other. From the chaos in Snow Country to the present. Since Wang Tianzong became the patriarch of Beihai, the past 2 years had been the most turbulent period. The suppression of the parliament, the restlessness of the dark world, the strong oppression brought to Beihai by Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu, and others, everything. For hundreds of years, this was what Beihai had been bearing, but it was something that few people could feel. Especially during the period of Wang Tianzong. During this period, without the Li family and the constraints and checks and balances around them, the Southeast group was gradually unified. After Wang Tianzong reached the top of the divine list, all the pressure from the outside world seemed to have completely disappeared. He could not be said to be the most outstanding patriarch in the history of the Wang family of Beihai, but he was definitely one of the strongest and most responsible patriarchs. He stood quietly on Mount Dibbing and bore all the hostility and pressure from the outside world. Whether it was a bloody storm or a stormy sea in front of him, Beihai behind him was always carefree, a paradise full of dreams and light. Until he fell in Snow Country, under the eternal sword of Mormons. Beihai was turned upside down. There was no dream in the world, and there was no light in the world. The figure that could block all the external pressure disappeared in front of the people of Beihai. Wang Xianxia came out. His shoulders were still very tender, and he had ascended in a hurry. The pressure from the outside world was overwhelming. This was something that Wang Tianzong could easily resist in the past, but when it fell on Wang Xianxia, it was almost unbearable. So on Mount Dibbing. The entire Beihai province began to be turbulent. More than 2 years were the time when Wang Xianxia matured quickly. No one would say that the young patriarch of Beihai was bad. Everyone could see that he had done his best. But everyone still hoped that Wang Tianzong could wake up. He was the first supreme chosen one in 100 years. If he could wake up and recover, together with the current Wang Xianxia, the present and future of Beihai would be unimaginably brilliant. So for more than 2 years, the top elites of Beihai's biological laboratory had been working overtime, trying to help their patriarch recover as soon as possible. Their efforts had achieved a certain degree of effect. Wang Tianzong's condition was indeed improving. However, the effect was not great. According to the normal speed, it would take at least 10 years for Wang Tianzong to recover. 10 years, not to mention the parliament of Zhongzhou state, not to mention Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei, not to mention other hostile forces. What would Emperor Dong's palace look like in 10 years? This was something that made people feel hopeless just thinking about it. Everyone was helpless, but they still gritted their teeth and persevered. No one could have thought that on a normal day, without any warning, Wang Tianzong's physical condition would suddenly and inexplicably usher in an incredible qualitative change. It was like a real miracle. Wang Tianzong blinked. This was the first time in more than 2 years that Wang Tianzong had consciously made a certain action. In the atmosphere that was almost boiling, the elites of the Beihai Biological Laboratory suddenly fell silent. Then, they turned around at the same time and bowed deeply to Saint. They said sincerely and respectfully, "Thank you, sir." Saint was not ostracized by these people when he participated in the project of treating Wang Tianzong. But at first, he was not valued by these people. People just regarded him as a very ordinary colleague. However, in a very short period of time, Saint had proposed several different treatment directions. At the same time, he used a way that they didn't realize before to prepare several kinds of gene potions. After establishing a preliminary balance for Wang Tianzong's body, everyone was convinced. Saint began to lead this group of top elites and took over the big project of treating Wang Tianzong. Saint had already prepared for Wang Tianzong's current condition. A few days ago, Saint said that in the next few days, Wang Tianzong's physical condition was expected to improve greatly. But no one could have imagined that the so-called improvement was so great. What was the concept of going from near death to full awakening? A group of elites looked up at Saint. Under the light, unlike their ecstatic faces, Saint's expression was still calm and indifferent, without any change in his expression. "Sir is really a man of God." A group of elites wanted to worship him. Saint glanced at them, took 2 steps forward, and said faintly, "Make way." A group of people stepped back and separated. Saint, who was not outstanding in appearance but full of charm, walked to the hibernation chamber. She observed Wang Tianzong through a small window. Wang Tianzong quietly looked at the soft light above the hibernation chamber. He hadn't opened his eyes for a long time. It seemed difficult for him to adapt, so he blinked faster. Then, he saw the saint who was watching him through the window. Wang Tianzong frowned slightly, and a clear doubt appeared in his eyes. He regained consciousness. Saint's eyes were clear, and he was completely sure of it. In this situation, Wang Tianzong was completely awake. His consciousness and thinking were no longer muddle-headed, but he was unprecedentedly sober. Saint remained calm and collected. 2 rays of light that were hard to detect flashed in her eyes. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she quietly observed Wang Tianzong. Sword Emperor's physical condition completely appeared in her sight. In her sight, Wang Tianzong's injury was still serious, even almost fatal. Saint could even clearly see that the eternal sword energy was still wreaking havoc inside Wang Tianzong's body, trying to decompose every structure of his body. However, Wang Tianzong's sword energy was constantly resisting, and the 2 barely reached a balance. Saint was not surprised by this result. Every time she observed Wang Tianzong before, she got the same result. But now, she saw very clearly that there was a 3rd kind of power in Wang Tianzong's body. It was a kind of energy that was so subtle that it was almost imperceptible. It was very weak, but it really existed. Saint's pupils shrank suddenly. This was a kind of energy that was hard for her to describe, with unimaginable vitality and unimaginable destructive power. This energy wandered in Wang Tianzong's body, constantly repairing Wang Tianzong's body, and constantly destroying Wang Tianzong's vitality. Saint quietly looked at Wang Tianzong and kept silent for a long time. Behind her, someone was saying thank you to her. The corner of her mouth twitched, and she looked a little embarrassed with her back to everyone. At this moment, it was hard for her to explain anything to those behind her. To be precise, today's accident did wake Wang Tianzong up. But his injury, instead of getting better, it seemed that it was getting worse. Chapter 1302. Saint could be sure that all this had nothing to do with him. She adjusted the balance in Wang Tianzong's body. If there was no accident, Wang Tianzong's internal injury would begin to stabilize in a few days, so that the whole Beihai would be completely relieved. That was what she meant. Wang Tianzong's body was getting better, so that he was completely out of the crisis of death. The next step was to recover slowly. But now, Saint quietly observed the energy in Wang Tianzong's body. The majestic vitality and the ultimate destruction were perfectly integrated in this energy. For a moment, Saint could only think of one word: life and death. Wang Tianzong died. It was not the kind of constant struggle between life and death. Instead, he had truly perished. Saint quietly looked at Wang Tianzong's eyes. His eyes were still turning. They would suddenly dim at some point and then brighten again. Saint took a deep breath and said calmly, "Go and inform Summer Solstice and Wang Xingxiao. Ask them to come here as soon as possible." "I've informed them," a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses said respectfully. Saint nodded and didn't say anything. He just observed Wang Tianzong's physical condition and frowned slightly. The extremely special energy was slowly dissipating in Wang Tianzong's body at this time, but the process was extremely slow. The destruction and repair were going on every minute and second. It was no exaggeration to say that Wang Tianzong was not qualified to touch the destructive power in this energy, even if he was the chosen one, even if he was supreme in the dark world. So the moment this energy entered Wang Tianzong's body, it had wiped out all of Wang Tianzong's vitality. At that moment, because the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the Sword Emperor of the Dark World, really died. But the majestic vitality contained in this energy restored Wang Tianzong's body before his consciousness dissipated. This speed was too fast. It was the repetition of life and death thousands of times per second. What did this mean? This meant that even under the suppression of the real environment, the energy in Wang Tianzong's body could kill Wang Tianzong thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times in a second. The power of destruction destroyed his life, and the majestic vitality resurrected him instantly. This process went on continuously. It was so short and fast that even the surrounding instruments could not react. Even Wang Tianzong himself did not realize that he had really died countless times and resurrected countless times. The power produced by such energy had far exceeded the destructive limit allowed by the real environment. There was only one possibility that Saint could think of. True imprint. Furthermore, it was a fully awakened true imprint. It was not a king in the neutral camp. Instead, it was the true imprint itself. The real environment of Miracle City was already close to its limit. In this kind of situation, even if the three supremes from the neutral camp personally came, the destructive power they could display here wouldn't exceed level 5 authority. They might have the characteristics of high authority, but there was a limit to their pure destructive power. Only the true mark itself could produce such a result. This also meant that at least for a moment, Wang Tianzong's body had merged with the true mark of a peak figure in the neutral camp. It also meant that the true mark of that peak figure had left his body for a short time. And, although the destructive power of this energy was extremely strong, the vitality it contained was equally terrifying. Wang Tianzong's body changed between life and death too fast. To some extent, his life and death were equivalent to not being hurt. From another perspective, this special energy was equivalent to having no power, at least in the eyes of the real environment, so this energy was allowed to exist. This was a lie. Fraud? The Princess Royal in the time corridor? Saint raised her eyebrows. She didn't know whether her inference was correct. The true mark was originally her, but it was a blind spot. There were too many things she couldn't understand, but she began to observe around instinctively, looking for the figure of the Princess Royal. Don't think too much. A calm voice suddenly sounded in Saint's ears. The figure of War God appeared beside Saint. It was still a black dragon robe. It was still a bloody mist flying all the time. But at this time, a large patch of dark blood appeared on the black dragon robe of War God. The blood was slowly spreading, and there was no sign of healing in a short time. Your Majesty. Saint was suddenly shocked and bowed to salute. Everything she had just thought about seemed to have the answer. War God nodded and glanced at Wang Tianzong through the hibernation cabin. The people around were still busy, completely ignoring the existence of War God. They saw the god of war with their eyes, but there were no related memories in their minds. The god of war in this state was just a projection of a memory. The moment they saw the god of war, their memories were taken away by the god of war. Therefore, it formed a special situation where they saw the god of war but didn't remember. They saw him but didn't remember him, which meant they didn't see him. Saint was a little confused. I was thinking about something new, and accidentally came to Miracle City. By the way, I took a look at Wuyo. War God said softly. Saint thought about it, looked at Wang Tianzong, and whispered, "Do you want me to help him recover as soon as possible?" The real environment blocked Miracle City. Currently, the role of the saints was not very big. But if she tried her best, she could make Wang Tianzong recover to his peak in less than a year. Just do it at your own pace. War God shook his head. Otherwise, someone will dislike you. If you really annoy her, you won't have a good time. Saint looked at the god of war in confusion and asked tentatively, "What are you?" "I met Feng Qinggu and suffered a little loss." War God laughed. "My daughter-in-law is really not easy to deal with." Princess Royal? Saint's face suddenly changed. War God narrowed his eyes. That scene on the stage of Formidable Person was simple, but also complicated. In his current state, it was not his real body, so he naturally couldn't feel Wuyo's existence. When he was looking for Wuyo, Wuyo was also observing him. What War God didn't expect was that Wuyo would take the initiative to attack him when Wuyo was sure that he was no threat to her. Wuyo was not a human, so she could feel his state. The moment Worryless made her move, the war god knew that Worryless was interested in his vitality. How strong was war god's vitality? Just a trace of it was enough to make Wang Tianzong recover instantly. Wuyo wanted to save Wang Tianzong, so she took the initiative to take the sword energy of war god. It was originally a massive energy core, so it could completely contain and even absorb the destructive power of the sword energy of war god, and then instill the vitality of the sword energy into Wang Tianzong's body. How weak was a streak of sword energy? War god didn't suffer any loss, and Wuyo and Wang Tianzong were both winning. However, the moment Worryless snatched the sword energy of the god of war, the god of war was still thinking about how to deal with it. Worryless had already started its operation. It kept all the vitality in the sword energy and planned to pour the destructive power in the sword energy into Wang Tianzong's body. It was supposed to be a win-win situation, but according to his operation, it was undoubtedly a lose-lose situation. Wuyo could tell the nature of the power. But the moment she got the sword energy of war god, she was deceived. A lie. The power of deception. Princess Royal Feng Qinggu of the space-time corridor took action. However, the god of war in the memory projection had no destructive power at all. He forcibly borrowed Worryless energy in an instant and broke Feng Qinggu's lie. At the moment when he attacked, Feng Qinggu used the second lie to trigger the rebound of the real environment. Under the pressure of the real environment, the god of war was directly injured and even slightly affected his body in the depths of the starry sky. The sword energy, with vitality and destructive power, passed Worryless and directly merged with Wang Tianzong. There was no influence of the real stamp from beginning to end. The reason why the special energy in Wang Tianzong's body was so destructive and vigorous was because of Feng Qinggu's deception. Her lie made the sword energy break through the influence of the real environment for a short time, and reached the level close to the 7th level of authority. Although the process was very short, only less than half a second. But then Feng Qinggu cheated time again. So the half a second began to extend inside Wang Tianzong's body, and it lasted all the time, finally forming the current situation. Saint subconsciously clenched his fists and whispered, "Is His Majesty all right?" The Princess Royal of the space-time corridor had always been the first person in the field of deception. She was completely synonymous with the peak. Her lie could break through the suppression of the real environment for a short time. Such a person here was enough to make anyone have a headache and be afraid. Sometimes a lie didn't have any destructive power, but sometimes it had absolute destructive power. At the height of Feng Qinggu, in the real environment, even the real war god would feel very uncomfortable. If it was just a projection, it was inevitable that he would suffer losses. It's not a big problem. War god looked at Wang Tianzong in the hibernation cabin and slightly narrowed his eyes. He could feel that his sword energy was dissipating at a very slow speed in Wang Tianzong's body. But in fact, this sword energy only existed for less than half a second. Even War God didn't know how long Feng Qinggu had extended this half a second. Life and death, a cycle. War God's voice was very low. Saint bit his lip and remained silent. Life and death repeated countless times every second. What would the final result be? The last cycle, is it life or death? This sword energy was now killing Wang Tianzong. It was also reviving Wang Tianzong. But this sword energy would eventually disappear. When it completely disappeared, the last cycle, what was left by this energy in the end, was it vitality? Or destruction? It can only be destruction. War God said blandly. If things ended here, Wang Tianzong would definitely die. The last cycle seemed to have a 50% probability of life or death, but in fact, there was a 100% probability of destruction. Feng Qinggu could deceive time, and naturally, she could deceive his sword energy. In the last cycle, even if there was a vitality, in Feng Qinggu's lies, it would become the opposite destruction. War God thought quietly for a while and suddenly raised his palm. The blood mist on his palms was still drifting around. A blood mist between illusion and reality slowly left his palm and blended into the hibernation cabin without any hindrance. It penetrated Wang Tianzong's skin little by little and gradually blended in. In Saint's sight, the blood mist began to gradually wrap that special energy. I don't want to keep him for anyone's sake. War God said blandly, but I spent most of my life in the real environment in Beihai. Just limited to the real environment, among the chiefs of Beihai, he is relatively outstanding. If he dies like this, I will feel uncomfortable. It doesn't matter whether he enters the starry sky or not. But at least, he has the right to choose his own way of death. Saint remained silent and lowered his body even more. Because she knew very well that this sentence was not for her. After a moment of silence, a very distant voice sounded, ethereal and cold. I take it that you acquiesce. War God's eyes flashed with a smile, like an elder facing a willful little girl. In the distance, the figure did not respond. War God sighed and looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. After a while, he suddenly smiled and said, I have gained something. His blood mist wrapped that special energy. But since Feng Qingwu could deceive his sword energy, she could also deceive the blood that left his body. If Feng Qingwu did not give up, War God could only fight with her here. Both sides knew very well that it was not good for each other. Now this result was just right. As long as Feng Qingwu did not make trouble, Wang Tianzong would not have a big problem. Isn't this too much gain? Saint hesitated and asked. At this time in Wang Tianzong's body, it was a sword energy and a drop of blood of War God. The blood would not merge. As for the sword energy, Wang Tianzong could not find anything in it. However, in the process, Wang Tianzong had experienced countless life and death situations. One day, he would realize something. After Mormon's eternal stroke, Wang Tianzong's realm had been seriously deficient. These experiences at the moment might allow him to directly open the way to the 5th level authority. Although this possibility was small, it was real. Your Majesty, if Wang Tianzong approaches the 5th level of authority first, Saint was a little hesitant. It's impossible for him. War God shook his head, and an inexplicable emotion flashed in his eyes. There is no martial arts in his eyes. I can understand him. This is his own choice. He can't blame anyone. This is his fate. It's already an unexpected gain to wake up now. War God looked at Saint and said, I'll leave it to you. I'll be in Miracle City recently. If there is any situation, you can inform me. Yes. Saint bowed deeply and said in a respectful tone. The god of war patted the hibernation chamber beside him. Amidst the joyous atmosphere, his figure gradually faded and disappeared without a trace. Chapter 1303. On the African continent. At the headquarters of the Divine Martial Army, Lin Shi, whose hands were stained with blood, washed his palms under the faucet. He looked at the apostle and said, I'll leave the rest to you. The apostle laughed, nodding his head in agreement. The transaction with the Wang family of Beihai was carried out in silence. During this period of time, the movements of the Divine Martial Army had attracted the attention of many people on the African continent. The relatively backward development and rich resource reserves of the African continent doomed it to chaos. In a sense, the chaos here was the result that many countries in the world were happy to see. The African continent was the African continent of the world. Jianghu State, Star State, the European Alliance, Snow Country, a large number of world powers and all the superpowers were supporting their own forces here. Behind the Divine Martial Army was the Wang family of Beihai. The Divine Martial Army, with more than 300,000 troops that had been passed down for hundreds of years, was the largest private armed force on the African continent. The Divine Martial Army attracted the attention of many people on the African continent. In other words, the recent movements of the Divine Martial Army had attracted the attention of all the forces and countries in the world. But for the time being, no one had the time to care about this. The Dark World gathered, and the most central focus was undoubtedly Jianghu State, or in other words, Tiannan. Wang Xingxiao's combat capability surpassed the peak of the invincible realm overnight. Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun formed an alliance. Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the divine list and was invincible in the world. Any of these things was more important than the divine martial army. All the major forces focused their attention here. Even if they noticed the internal changes of the divine martial army, they didn't care much. So in the silence that the whole world noticed and then ignored, the divine martial army began to change hands little by little under everyone's eyes. The process was not very smooth. The Wang family of Beihai and Wang Xingxiao were willing to hand over the divine martial army to Lin Shi, but they were not obliged to make the divine martial army obedient to Lin Shi. Their meaning was very simple. If you wanted the divine martial army, you could, but whether you could get it or not depended on your own ability. This was very fair, and Lin Shi had no objection. So the Wang family of Beihai transferred away the real high-ranking members of the divine martial army and handed over this big mess to Lin Shi without hesitation. Without any suspense, chaos erupted within the divine martial army. They were the largest armed organization on the continent with the best armaments and the strongest combat effectiveness. Even when it belonged to the Wang family of Beihai, Mount Dibing had to consider the overall demands of the divine martial army when using it. Now the Wang family of Beihai did not hesitate to let go, which meant that from now on, the Wang family of Beihai would cut off the supply of materials and armaments to the divine martial army. Chaos was inevitable. Not long after the lineal forces of the Wang family of Beihai withdrew from the divine martial army, the two bases of the divine martial army had publicly announced that they had left the divine martial army. More and more people began to follow suit. Some people tried to overthrow Lin Shi and return to the arms of the Wang family of Beihai. After all, even if Li Tianlan had risen, the banner of the Wang family of Beihai was still quite useful. If they got close to the banner of the Wang family of Beihai, even in the chaotic continent, they could get a stable space. The Wang family of Beihai's emphasis on armed forces had never changed. Even for the divine martial army, the supply of materials was not bad at all. Staying in the divine martial army, although there would be battles, it was very comfortable on the whole. Some people planned to set up their own forces. The high-ranking members of the other forces on the continent had no time to pay attention to the divine martial army, but the forces they supported here would not let go of this opportunity. One by one, they extended an olive branch to the divine martial army, and their promises were extremely tempting. The Wang family of Beihai had withdrawn from the divine martial army. They had changed from servants to masters, which was also quite attractive. So some people planned to leave and be the masters themselves, while others planned to return to Beihai. These two ideas had completely different opposites in the divine martial army, forming two large camps. Only a few of them were loyal to their new master, Lin Shi. So Lin Shi was very busy during this time. The apostle was also very busy. There were only 3 of them here. Saint was now in Beihai, and he could only rely on the 2 of them to control the more than 300,000 troops of the divine martial army. The 2 of them first talked to the middle-level members who were determined to leave the divine martial army. After not getting the desired result, they began to act separately. During this time, the people in charge of the bases who had said they wanted to leave the divine martial army were all killed. They were not assassinated. Instead, they killed their way over openly. First, they gave an ultimatum, and then they attacked directly to the end. Anyone who dared to resist was directly flattened. On the first day that Lin Shi and the apostle acted separately, 2 bases of the divine martial army were directly turned into ruins. Whether it was the high-ranking members or the guards of the bases, they were all killed. No one survived. With the lessons learned from the mistakes of the 3rd and 4th bases, there were not many people who dared to resist anymore. Then the high-ranking members of the 5th and 6th bases began to flee. Lin Shi and the apostle were responsible for chasing and killing them. They had been busy until now. Today was already the 12th base. Lin Shi and the apostle had a simple meeting. Right now, the bodies of the high-ranking members of the base were still warm, but inside the base, order had begun to be restored. These people are relatively easy to deal with at the moment. Saint said softly, they belong to the Wang family of Beihai and are used to relying on the big forces. The leaders of the base want to leave the divine martial army completely out of their own selfish desires. As for the ordinary combatants, they actually don't think much. Your Highness, to put it bluntly, the reason why the divine martial army is in such a situation is that we are unknown. I'm sure that if the one who took over the power of the divine martial army from the Wang family of Beihai was not us, but Emperor East's palace, no one in the divine martial army would resist, and there would not be any internal chaos. Lin Shi nodded. Indeed. So next, we have to continue to show our strength. First, we will kill these people who openly intend to betray the divine martial army and play a deterrent role. The next step is the most important. Saint said softly, the problem of materials. If we want these people to completely surrender, the problem of materials is the most basic. At the very least, the materials we supply to the divine martial army can't be worse than what the Wang family of Beihai supplies them. The daily consumption of materials for more than 300,000 people is an astronomical figure. He hesitated, looked at Lin Shi, and said with a wry smile, I'm already considering whether to sell some inconspicuous technology to Zhongzhou State or Star State. There's no need. Lin Shi said, next, we will speed up the action of conquering the divine martial army. We can kill more people and scare them first. Then, I will go to negotiate with Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State will be responsible for the materials, and we will have a chance to enter Zhongzhou State. We don't have too much time to waste on slow development. After we stabilize the divine martial army and enter Zhongzhou State, it will be the stage for us and Emperor East's palace. The divine martial army will tell Emperor Dong's palace a fact. His Majesty may be invincible, but at this stage, he still has opponents. Chapter 1304. The apostle suddenly smiled and whispered, Xianyuan Wushang is going to have a headache. Lin Shi's meaning was obvious. He wanted to speed up the integration of the Xinwu Legion and then speed up the pace of the entire Dark World. Whether it was killing or conciliation, the first thing to do was to stabilize the Xinwu Legion and then cooperate with Zhongzhou State. Whether Zhongzhou State accepted it or not, the Xinwu Legion could accept it. It was just a different result. If Zhongzhou State accepted it, the Xinwu Legion would be its partner. Lin Shi entered Zhongzhou State and his influence would spread quickly. It was not easy to guess Li Huaqing's attitude, but the Southeast group would definitely welcome Lin Shi's arrival. In this way, Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace, Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun's alliance, plus the Xinwu Legion and the Wang family of Beihai, formed a tripartite balance in Zhongzhou State. It did not matter if Zhongzhou State refused. The Xinwu Legion would not stop. As long as the Zhongzhou State Parliament refused, there would be a large-scale invasion at the level of the Dark World. At present, Tiannan was the best breakthrough. When the Xinwu Legion entered Tiannan, Lin Shi would directly stand on the opposite side of Li Tianlan. This was the result that Lin Shi wanted. Therefore, whether Zhongzhou State accepted the Xinwu Legion or not, it would not change Lin Shi's decision. And Lin Shi's series of actions would inevitably stimulate Emperor Dong's palace and speed up the pace of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai's return from another level. This was not a bad thing, but it might not be what Xianyuan Wushang liked. He had to pay closer attention to Li Tianlan's actions as the situation changed and play a key role in guiding at certain times. That's not what I meant. If he has a headache, it only means that he hasn't done enough preparation. Lin Shi said calmly, after all, His Majesty and I don't have much time. The apostle was silent. In the God of War's realm, the 11th prince was a real genius. This was a fact recognized by the God of War's realm and even the whole starry sky. He was the youngest son of the war god, but he was also the one with the most outstanding talent. Over the course of millions of years in the starry sky, of the 11 children of the war god, the 6th princess could be said to be the most outstanding in terms of talent. And in terms of talent, Lin Shi was the most stunning. Lin Shi's advancement had no bottleneck. This description alone was enough to shake the entire neutral faction. Ever since his birth, Lin Shi had never encountered any bottlenecks or difficulties in his cultivation. Every time Lin Shi ascended, he was perfect. He refused to compromise and rushed forward without pause. Everyone believed that he would inherit his father's glory. In the near future, the second human sovereign would appear in the war god world. However, Lin Shi, who had been advancing triumphantly all this time, suddenly stopped after reaching level 8 and becoming an Azura. The 8th level of authority of a martial artist. Undying Azura. At this point, Lin Shi could no longer be considered a fallen genius. Even in the entire starry sky, there were not many people who could reach this height. In a neutral faction like the Spacetime Cloister, every powerhouse with level 8 authority was qualified to be a marquis. And in a power like the War God World's Human Imperial Palace, which didn't have a strong enough foundation, a top powerhouse of the 8th level was already enough to be conferred the title of king. For example, the Apostle himself. He was one of the strongest among the 8 levels of authority, and with his special characteristics, he had the qualifications to become a king of the War God realm. However, he had rejected the throne himself, and only took on the role of Duke and Great General, using a relatively free identity to accompany Lin Shi in his true body. For Lin Shi to be able to reach where he was today, he could already be considered a powerhouse who had set foot on the peak. However, compared to his previous rapid progress, the stagnation after reaching the 8th level of authority clearly made him feel a little disappointed. Over the countless years, he had used countless methods to surpass his limits again and again, but he had not made the slightest progress in his martial way. The War God and Human Emperor had talked to Lin Shi, but they couldn't come up with any good ideas. In the end, the War God thought for a long time before deciding to send Lin Shi to Miracle City. But the War God was one step too late. Because when the War God made up his mind, Dongxing Huangtu and another spacetime had already fallen. So Lin Shi could only continue to wait. During this time, the War God kept thinking, and his thoughts gradually matured. Finally, he found the right opportunity to send Lin Shi here. Complete death is the beginning of a new life. This was the War God's original words. Lin Shi and the Apostle still didn't understand the meaning of this sentence, but the War God's instructions were very clear. Die in the hands of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. This was Lin Shi's task. To be precise, he was here to die. Only complete death was the beginning of a new life. This task was so straightforward that it was destined that Lin Shi would stand on the opposite side of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai from the beginning. He would die in the hands of the two of them. The Apostle thought for a moment and whispered, "Your Highness, if we can enter Zhongzhou State, should we suppress Emperor Dong's palace?" "It depends on the specific situation." Lin Shi's tone was calm. "The most basic gesture has to be made. Suppress Emperor Dong's palace." Lin Shi and the Apostles were probably the only ones in the dark world who could say such simple words. If the elder princess, who was in a special state now in the cloister of time and space, was excluded and limited to the environment of Miracle City, who could be Lin Shi's opponent? Xianyuan Wushang was one, but that fatty clearly didn't understand martial arts. Martial arts was the most direct method of destruction. If they were outside Miracle City, Xianyuan Wushang could probably beat a group of Lin Shi. However, in an environment like Miracle City where one couldn't break through level 5 authorization, Xianyuan Wushang might not be able to do anything to Lin Shi in a direct confrontation. What did level 8 of martial arts mean? It meant that he would be completely suppressed in Miracle City. But to be precise, this kind of suppression didn't suppress Lin Shi to the level of an ordinary person, but to suppress his strength to the upper limit allowed by the real environment. From the perspective of martial arts, the upper limit of the combat capability allowed by the real environment was level 4. 7. In the starry sky, level 4. 7 was the threshold for the qualitative change of life form. And in Miracle City, because of the mark of truth and their own characteristics, the real top figures could touch the characteristics of level 5 or even higher authority after reaching the upper limit of their combat capability. Their comprehensive combat capability could be infinitely close to level 5, or even be barely on par with level 5. Lin Shi's mark of truth had almost been completely obliterated, but his characteristics and divine form were still there. Moreover, he was not a returning character, nor was he a character who had stepped into the starry sky for the first time. The 11th prince of the god of war realm was a veteran in the starry sky. His experience, vision, and fighting style were at the peak of what he could reach at present. So now Lin Shi was in the real environment, and his combat capability had reached the upper limit allowed by the real environment. With level 4.7 authority and his own advantages, his real combat capability was infinitely close to level 5. That was the real extreme state of the Chosen One. Even if time and space were to change, such a Lin Shi wouldn't be inferior to Li Dongqing in another time and space. The current Li Tianlan obviously hadn't reached this height yet. If it was a battle of life and death, it was hard to say who would win between Li Tianlan and Lin Shi. But under normal circumstances, there was only one way Li Tianlan could crush Lin Shi in terms of combat capability. That was, he had also reached level 4.7 authority and reached the real extreme state of the Chosen One. He had no mercy. With a combination of many factors, Li Tianlan's combat capability in that state could directly surpass level 5 authority, far surpassing Lin Shi. And in that state, Li Tianlan would directly face the truth of the world and the starry sky and officially embark on the journey back to the starry sky. But now, with absolute personal strength, if they entered Zhongzhou state, it wouldn't be difficult to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. The most basic posture, the apostle felt a headache coming on. Not going too far? Lin Shi seemed to be so angry that he laughed. What else? Do you really want to risk your life with His Majesty? Now in terms of strength, he's not as good as me. But if we really push him and ask him to go all out, who can withstand it? Even if he goes all out, he can't reach the strongest state we expect. But how many characteristics does His Majesty have? How many divine forms? If those things are really forced out, you and I will all die in vain. Forget about a new life, just say goodbye to the world. The apostle's mouth twitched. His Highness must die in the hands of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai when they both reach the best state, because only then would their true brand be in the state of activation. If he didn't wait until then and died in His Majesty's characteristics or divine forms, then he would really die unjustly, even cowardly. Even if it's a suicide mission, it's not that simple. Lin Shi sighed softly and felt a little tired. We can only wait, so I want to speed up the pace and force them. Maybe I can also be free quickly. Now it's really boring. The apostle didn't speak. But a flat and gentle voice suddenly rang out from Lin Shi's side. If you think it's boring because you're strong, then from today on, you'll definitely find the next life very interesting. Lin Shi was shocked. Behind him, the apostle's loud and high voice rang out. Greetings, Your Majesty. The black dragon robe slowly gathered around the two of them. The figure of the god of war appeared beside them. Lin Shi bowed and said respectfully, Father. The god of war looked at him and smiled. How do you feel about life here? Do you feel wronged? Lin Shi said seriously, I think it's very interesting. You changed the topic quickly. The god of war's voice was gentle. Unfortunately, it's too late. Before Lin Shi could say anything, the god of war had already continued to speak. I found a way to let you reach the peak. Lin Shi's eyes suddenly lit up. He looked at the god of war attentively. The battle god glanced around. His sword Shi expanded with him at the center. After that, he laughed, Feilu, this place isn't bad. You might not know this, but back then when I first met your mother, this was the place where we first met. I'm really in bad shape recently. Damn it, very bad. I always wanted to write a big chapter, but I couldn't. Yesterday, I finished the 3rd injection of vaccine. Every time I finish, I feel sleepy and can't open my eyes. So I said in the group that today's update will be very late. I got up at dawn to write this chapter, and then I'm still sleepy and can't open my eyes. Go back to sleep. Even if I can get up before 12 o'clock tonight, it'll be hard to update. Don't wait for me to write. Chapter 1305. The god of war was in high spirits when it came to Africa. But Lin Shi and the apostle were helpless. The god of war and Lin Shi's mother did meet in Africa. This was Rahab. If the location was precise, it was not far from the real place where the god of war and Lin Shi's mother met for the first time. At that time, the young god of war and the mistress of the god of war's realm met here. The god of war said that Lin Shi might not know. Lin Shi had nothing to say. This was an old joke. Lin Shi had heard it from his mother and father when he was very young. He had heard it tens of thousands of times over the years. Lin Shi could even recite what the god of war was going to say next. At that time, Lin Shi murmured in his heart. The god of war's voice echoed with laughter. At that time, ahem, the apostle couldn't take it anymore. He coughed and said respectfully, Your Majesty, His Highness plans to use the Shenwu army as a bargaining chip to negotiate with Central Continent. If everything goes well, the Shenwu army's headquarters will move to the subcontinent and this place will become the largest branch of the Shenwu army in Africa. The god of war paused and looked at the apostle with a strange expression. The apostle revealed a smile, simple and honest, extremely simple and honest. Not only Lin Shi, the son, was tired of hearing some stories, but so were the elders. There weren't many mistresses in the god of war's realm and the emperor's palace. Well, at least not as many as Emperor Xianyuan, who had a harem of 3,000 beauties. But in these two forces, every mistress had a sense of existence. Lin Shi's mother was from the emperor's palace, or rather, from the Wang family of Beihai today. She was the daughter of the human emperor. Before the god of war's realm was established, this extraordinary woman had already crossed the threshold of level 9 authority. Although she wasn't the most supreme in the neutral camp, she was definitely one of the strongest in the starry sky. Even in the corridor of time and space, she was a queen who was not much weaker than the eldest princess. On the other hand, although Emperor Xianyuan was strong, his harem wasn't that outstanding. So when the god of war was happy, he liked to brag about his female confidants. Not only Lin Shi's mother, but they had heard the story of every mistress in the god of war's realm and the god of war many times. The key was that the god of war's routine never changed. Every time he said it, he would say, You may not know. You don't know? How could he not know? He was already sick of hearing it. You can make the decision on this matter. I won't participate. The god of war seemed to have calmed down after being interrupted. The apostle nodded and responded. As if afraid that the war god would bring up the old matter again, he bowed deeply and said calmly, This subject will take his leave. The god of war stared at his back in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. Lin Shi coughed and said with a chuckle, Father, the Shenwu Corps is relatively advanced in all aspects, and the supply of materials is also top-notch. Although its armaments can't be compared with the Beihai Corps, they are not weaker than any main corps in Jianghu state. Now we have the Shenwu Corps, but we have lost the materials and armaments supplied by the Wang family of Beihai. This is the most unstable part of the current situation. The apostle needs to take stock of the Shenwu army's assets. Only then will we have enough bargaining chips to discuss cooperation with the central state. We can also understand how much we need to get from the central state parliament to stabilize the hearts of the Shenwu army. The god of war nodded and said thoughtfully, If the parliament is willing to cooperate with you, how do you plan to enter Jianghu state? The Shenwu Corps would withdraw from the Afro-continent on a large scale, leaving only some main bases to guard the interests here. Naturally, the focus would shift to the subcontinent. Jianghu state is a bit chaotic now, and it may not be able to accommodate the Shenwu Corps. Lin Shi said quietly, Jiang Shanyu's three-man alliance, the new group of Emperor Dong's palace, the Six itself, the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao, and Wang Qinglei are all muddy waters. If the Shenwu Corps directly enters Jianghu state, it will be very difficult at this time. It is better to take root in the place closest to Jianghu state. For example, the god of war raised his eyebrows. Lin Shi smiled. For example, Tiannan. The Burning Corps' territory is not bad. I will go there soon. If they are smart enough, they should understand that submitting to the Shenwu core is the best choice. The burning core is a peripheral force of Beihai. The god of war said lightly. Lin Shi was stunned. At present, the Dark World generally believed that the burning core was related to Gu Xingyun and Kuan City. It was related to Luan City. Ramiro, the commander of the burning core, was even trained by Gu Xingyun. If you look carefully at the history of the Afrocontinent in the past few hundred years, you will find that although the Shenwu core has always been the number one core on the Afrocontinent, there will always be a slightly weaker force beside the Shenwu core, but it is still a great threat to the Shenwu core. These forces will either be annexed by the Shenwu core or absorbed by other super forces, and eventually disappear. For hundreds of years, there will be such forces in every generation. The god of war said softly, when I was in Beihai, the Afrocontinent was not peaceful for a few years. At that time, the Star State did not give up, and the Afrocontinent was the main battlefield for their counterattack. At that time, your grandfather had just entered the starry sky, and the situation was the most chaotic. I stayed in the Afrocontinent for a few years and served as the commander of the Shenwu Corps. Lin Shi's brows furrowed for a moment before relaxing. It was my decision to support a force that seemed to be the enemy of the Shenwu Corps but was actually one of us. The force that played the role of the Burning Corps for the first time was called the Temple Legion. They were hostile to the Shenwu Corps and were roped in by the Star State. In the end, they turned against the Star State at the critical moment and completely destroyed the destiny of the Star State. After that battle, more than half of the 50,000 elites of the Temple Legion were lost, but more than 100,000 elite land and navy troops of the Star State were almost wiped out. The Star State paid an astronomical amount of compensation. Some of the allies who originally supported the Star State also chose to be neutral. The Star State split, and the Kingdom of Deathsack completed the poison and officially established diplomatic relations with Jianghu State. From that time on, the Star State officially lost the chance to compete with Jianghu State for the world hegemony. After that, I returned to Beihai from the Afrocontinent and began to train the second generation of the Temple Legion, named Revenge. Today, in this generation, this role has become the Burning Corps. Ramiro, the commander of the Burning Corps, should have been trained by Wang Tianzong. Lin Shi felt a little ridiculous. Wang Tianzong is seriously injured now, which means that the Wang family of Beihai doesn't know that the Burning Corps is one of them? Summer Solstice must know. The god of war smiled. When the Burning Corps entered Tiannan, on the surface, it was Gu Xingyun's work, but there might be a plan of Beihai behind it. Until now, this card is still hidden. Even during the final battle of Beihai, Ramiro, an expert of the Invincible Realm, didn't show up. Obviously, the Burning Corps is a very important pawn in Beihai, and there is a bigger plot behind it. Lin Shi fell silent. A card that had not been used during the final battle of Beihai. This also meant that in the final battle of Beihai at that time, there was one less expert of the Invincible Realm in Beihai. They were still hiding it at the moment of life and death. When was Beihai going to use the card of the Burning Corps? What was their purpose? The corner of his mouth twitched, and he said slowly, I don't know about this. The god of war said yes. Lin Shi looked up at the god of war and asked in confusion, what did father just say? The god of war silently glanced at his son and understood what he meant. Beihai was still his ally, but the first plan he had to carry out after entering Jianghu State was to swallow the Burning Corps, which was equivalent to hurting the interests of Beihai. He wanted to swallow the Burning Corps and destroy the trump card of the Wang family of Beihai, just to satisfy his own interests. After swallowing the Burning Corps, Beihai could either swallow it in silence, or even negotiate with him in private. He could use the excuse that he didn't know about it in advance. But it was impossible for him to spit out what he had eaten. In this case, the possibility of Beihai falling out with him was very small. As long as the relationship between the two could be maintained, Lin Shi would be much more at ease in Jianghu State. Then pretend that you don't know. The god of war said blandly. Lin Shi looked serious and said, I really don't know. Father didn't say anything just now. The god of war glanced at him and suddenly said, sometimes your temperament is really like your grandfather's. Ah. Lin Shi was stunned. The god of war said, "They are all so shameless." Lin Shi touched his nose and said with a smile, "Don't say that in front of grandfather. Your grandfather is not my opponent now." The god of war waved his hand, "I'm not afraid even if you say it in front of me." The emperor's condition was not complete. Although he was also at the peak in terms of authority, if he wanted to reach the peak of his combat power, the only choice was to return. He, the emperor, Huang Shi, and Shibai had already existed before the end of the world. In other words, the true imprint on them was the most perfect state. Compared to growing up in the eyes of the world, it was more perfect than the great Emperor Xianyuan. The reason why he and the emperor were not the opponents of the great Emperor Xianyuan now was that the great emperor had more than one authority after returning. Two of them had reached the peak of level 8 authority, and 2 to 3 neutral level 9 authority. The great Emperor Xianyuan was the ultimate combination of fancy things. The god of war and the emperor of war, who had reached the peak of 1 authority, were basically no match for the great Emperor Xianyuan. Even if their true imprint was perfect, even if their true imprint increased their combat power to a terrifying level, it was still not enough. The emperor chose to reincarnate to accommodate more authority, and at the same time find what he had lost before the end of the world. The god of war was very lucky. He had long obtained the human skin he left behind before the end of the world. He no longer needed to go to reincarnate to find anything. He had always been an extremely pure person. Martial Dao was his strong foundation. He chose martial Dao, so he was too lazy to accommodate the authority created by others. He wanted to research new authority, not only to let Lin Shi reach the peak, but also to use the new authority he researched to directly break through the limit of level 9 authority. Because the emperor's condition was not complete, he was more tactful. The god of war's current condition was complete. Everything he did in his life was absolutely extreme and crazy. "What if I add my grandmother?" Lin Shi said quietly. Lin Shi's grandmother and Lin Shi's mother both had level 9 authority. Such a story was already comparable to Her Royal Highness Shibai and Princess Royal Jianghu in the time corridor. "What did you say just now?" The god of war was silent for a moment and asked. "I didn't say anything. Father also didn't say anything." Lin Shi smiled. It was a very simple and honest kind. The god of war smiled and sat down on the sofa. He suddenly asked, "Do you miss home?" The smile on Lin Shi's face froze slightly. He sat opposite the god of war and remained silent. "Your mother misses you very much, but it's not convenient for her to come over," the god of war said. Lin Shi's heart suddenly twitched. He opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, and finally said softly, "Father, can I still see my mother?" A long time later. The god of war looked at his son quietly, and at that time, "You will not be Lin Shi." Lin Shi was silent. After returning, he would naturally have a new identity. The god of war said a long time later. It was after samsara. He would die in Miracle City under Li Tianlan's strongest state. When he returned again, he didn't know whether he was still his mother's son in her heart. "You can also go home now." The god of war looked at his son. His line of sight shifted slightly, "But your achievements in this life will stop here. The future of the human clan is related to you, but also has nothing to do with it. An Azura with level 8 authority could be useful in front of the entire human clan, but it definitely wouldn't affect the overall situation." The god of war's voice was a bit erratic. "It's not too late to regret now. You can still go home now." "I don't dare to regret." Lin Shi looked down and said softly, "I just want to ask, is it worth it for me to come here and die here?" The god of war said that his death would be the opportunity for him to return to the peak. The peak experts in the starry sky never represented glory, but a heavy and suffocating responsibility. Every peak expert who entered level 9 authority had the responsibility to carry the future of the human clan on their shoulders. They had to struggle at death's door. The cruelest thing was that they couldn't see any hope. This was the path that Lin Shi had to take. It was also the path that anyone who had hope of reaching the peak had to take. So it wasn't that Lin Shi didn't regret it. It was that he didn't dare to regret it. The hope of reaching the peak was right in front of him. Scenes from when he was young flashed in his mind. He couldn't look back. He didn't dare to look back. It's worth it. The god of war gave a clear answer. Lin Shi was silent. After a while, he slowly asked, "Father, can you explain why I have the opportunity to reach the peak if I die in the hands of His Majesty Li Tianlan?" The god of war was silent for a while. He didn't answer this question. Instead, he asked a question that seemed to have nothing to do with Lin Shi's question. "Shi, do you want to become the end?" Chapter 1306. Apocalypse. The god of war casually uttered these simple words. But the atmosphere in the air became oppressive as he uttered these two words. The word apocalypse was nothing more than an adjective in Miracle City, but anyone who had seen the starry sky and faced the world would understand the weight of this word. One of the 3.5 privileges of the Order faction. The initial privilege was researcher, also known as scholar, and the peak was apocalypse. From the perspective of the neutral faction, the chaotic and ever-changing unknown had the highest upper limit from the perspective of combat power. This was because the authority of the unknown was constantly changing. In other words, it could use any ability of any authority and had the power to ignore the faction. The existence of the unknown only represented the upper limit of combat power, and it was only the theoretical upper limit. But apocalypse was different. Ever since the human race stepped into the starry sky until now, after many reincarnations, in the vast space and endless time, apocalypse had always been synonymous with the highest authority. What was order? Order was the order of the world. The simplest explanation could be summarized in 3 words. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. These 3 words could describe the 3.5 privileges of the Order faction. But at the same time, these 3 words could also be used to describe the apocalypse. The apocalypse wielded the strongest, most thorough, and most violent power of destruction in the starry sky. This was the limit of science and theology. Theoretically speaking, if an apocalypse had a deep enough foundation and could mobilize nearly limitless resources, they could appear in any corner of the starry sky. The apocalypse could develop the most advanced weapons in the starry sky, create their own army or even civilization, and use countless devices to simulate the power of various privileges. What determined the combat power of the apocalypse wasn't their bodies. In fact, the apocalypses in the Order faction didn't care about their bodies at all, because most of the time, their enemies couldn't even find their bodies. Their true bodies could be anything, but in battle, they were the thought doppelgangers they created. Wherever the apocalypse's thought doppelgangers covered would be a dense mechanical army that could drown the starry sky. The strength of the apocalypse relied on knowledge. There were no flaws in their knowledge. That was why the apocalypse was infinitely close to being unsolvable. In front of the war god realm and the human emperor's palace, the space-time corridor was able to cause tremendous damage to order and shadow in every cycle. But in the end, it still couldn't escape the fate of being completely destroyed by the apocalypse's indescribably powerful firepower. From a certain point of view, the history of the human race after they stepped into the starry sky was the history of the human race struggling to survive under the cannon fire of doomsday. Even today, this situation had not changed. It was precisely because of this that the war god, who had killed an apocalypse single-handedly, was hailed as the pinnacle of martial arts in the neutral camp, the sharpest sword light of the human race. In a situation where his authority was almost completely suppressed, using the power of God slaying to kill the apocalypse, this was an absolute miracle in the universe. Being able to have an apocalypse, even if there was only one, was a long-cherished dream of the neutral faction. It could even be considered an extravagant hope. However, the authority of the Order faction was something that a neutral character couldn't cross. Unless he completely transformed into an Order creature and joined the Order faction, the highest level of authority for a neutral creature to research Order was 8. 9. No matter how close he was to level 9, there was no way for him to cross over. The previous level of authority for an apocalypse was called the Apostle of Destruction. The Apostle by Lin Shi's side was the peak of the Apostle of Destruction authority, but it was also his peak, there was no way for him to advance any further. If humanity had an apocalypse, this was also an if, something that could only be imagined in the past. But now, this if had the possibility of being realized. Lin Shi silently raised his hand. A ray of light shone from the center of his palm. The faint but gentle ray of light continued to form, finally turning into an unassuming speck of light. Yes, Lin Shi's voice was low and absent-minded. War God looked at the speck of light in Lin Shi's hand and narrowed his eyes. This was the soul fragment that fell off from the unknown when he killed the unknown. This soul fragment contained the entirety of the Apocalypse's authority, from level 1 to level 9. Although this fragment wasn't complete, the knowledge that was preserved the most complete was the knowledge of the highest authority. This wasn't the will of the world, but the purest seed of authority. In other words, this seed could be absorbed by a neutral creature. After absorbing the seed, one wouldn't immediately become an apocalypse, but it would be the same as opening the gap between an apostle and an apocalypse. This way, the neutral faction would have their first apocalypse after stepping into space. The apocalypse of humanity. If you want to, then why is this seed still in your hand? War God asked. Lin Shi smiled bitterly. His eyes were a bit dim as he muttered, "Your son doesn't have a true brand." After obtaining this soul fragment, he asked War God about it. War God expressed that he wasn't interested in becoming an apocalypse, as he had his own path. Lin Shi's first choice after that was to absorb this soul fragment. But when he tried to do so, he found that he couldn't absorb it at all. After studying it for a long time, he came to a vague conclusion that it had something to do with a true brand. During the countless battles, the neutral faction had naturally obtained a large number of soul fragments, but most of them were low mid-level authority, so there was no limit to how much they could absorb. As for how to absorb a peak authority, this was a blind spot for the neutral faction, because they had never obtained a fragment of this level before. They could absorb low mid-level authority, but not peak authority. The most likely difference between them was whether or not there was a true imprint. The true brand wasn't only unique to War God and the others. This was a powerful weapon against the will of the world. Every combatant who stepped into level 9 authority would condense their own true brand, which meant that a combatant with a true brand would be able to withstand the power of a peak authority. And the power of an apocalypse came from knowledge. Although this fragment wasn't complete, the knowledge contained inside wasn't something that Lin Shi could withstand without a true brand, so he would either be unable to absorb it, or he would be completely drowned in it the moment he absorbed it, causing his brain to explode and he would die. That's why this fragment, strictly speaking, was prepared for the few peak combatants in the neutral faction. For Lin Shi, it was just a fragment that he couldn't use, or a powerful virus that he couldn't resist. That's why his actions in Miracle City were so urgent. He wanted to speed up the pace, wanting to die in Li Tianlan's hands. If he died in Li Tianlan's hands, he would be able to return to the peak, becoming the first apocalypse in human history, and a peak combatant with dual authority. War God raised his palm. The seed in Lin Shi's hand slowly fell into War God's palm. Lin Shi hesitated. Although he was reluctant, he still smiled and said, "This seed can also be given to Her Majesty Huang Shi or Her Highness Shi Bai." Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai didn't have level 9 authority now. But they had a true brand. Now they were about to return. If they absorbed this seed, an apocalypse existence could greatly relieve the pressure of the neutral faction. War God smiled and said, "Li Tianlan shouldn't be interested in this thing. As for Qin Weibai, such a big gift is in our hands. Why should I give it to her to please someone else's wife?" Lin Shi felt better and said willingly, "You can also give it to Mother. She's still trying to reach level 9. 5 authority, so she can't be distracted." War God shook his head and said, "I'll study this seed for a while, and then it's yours." After a pause, War God said softly, "Actually, you have a true brand." Lin Shi didn't seem to hear clearly and asked, "What did you say?" "I mean," War God looked up at Lin Shi and said, "You have a true brand." Lin Shi stood there, dumbfounded. After a long time, he opened his eyes wide and said incredulously, "I'm also a returnee?" If he also had a true brand, it meant that he had reached level 9 authority in a certain reincarnation and was now returning? But, if he was also a returnee, why was he born in the starry sky? Why wasn't it in a real environment? The most important thing was, if he was a returnee, then who was he? Lin Shi opened his mouth. There was so much information that he couldn't react for a while. Strictly speaking, you are a returnee, but there's a problem with your return. At the same time, you are not a returnee. War God pointed to the sofa in front of him and said, "Sit down." Lin Shi sat down in a daze and was in a daze. You have a true brand. War God said softly, but there's a big problem with your true brand. In short, it's almost completely obliterated. Almost completely obliterated? Lin Shi blinked. This is your current state. The true brand is equivalent to not existing, but it still exists. Therefore, before you reach level 8, you will be able to advance without any obstacles. However, your true imprint is incomplete, which completely limits your future. Your upper limit is equivalent to being locked. Unless you have a way to complete your true brand. There is a way, that is, you can step into the realm of level 9 authority again. But without the true brand, you can't return to that realm, so there's no way. An incomparably strong impact hit him in the face. Lin Shi took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Now that this soul fragment is in your hands, not to mention that you can't absorb it now, even if you can absorb it, there's a high probability that it will stay at the apostle level and not reach the doomsday level. According to our and your own expectations, you don't have a future in your current state. Level 8 authority was already a big shot in the starry sky. But for Lin Shi, who had always aimed for level 9 authority, not being able to make any progress in his life was equivalent to having no future. There were some things he didn't say and couldn't say now. For example, he didn't tell Lin Shi his previous identity. At the end of the War of God's investiture, Di Zhou's death seemed normal at that time, but with Lin Shi's appearance, many things became more and more strange. At that time, although Huang Shi was seriously injured, his overall state was still at the peak of the neutral camp. The reason why Lin Shi could return now could be explained by Huang Shi being seriously injured and unable to kill Di Zhou. That was what War God thought before. But now it was different. The moment War God's sword entered Miracle City at the speed of thought from the depths of the starry sky, his sword energy inadvertently borrowed Li Tianlan's divine form and characteristics. Divine form 9 deaths. Characteristics termination. It was also because of this divine form and characteristics that the sword completely obliterated the unknown. At that moment, War God also felt the special characteristics of 9 deaths and termination. War God also had the characteristics of termination. But divine form 9 deaths was unique. It was because he felt the special characteristics of 9 deaths that War God felt confused. In the War of God's investiture, even if Huang Shi was seriously injured, if he wanted to completely kill Di Zhou, there was absolutely no possibility of Di Zhou returning under 9 deaths. Serious injuries were not enough to explain this. Didn't that mean there was another possibility? Huang Shi didn't want to kill him completely at that time, so he obliterated most of Di Zhou's real brand, but left a trace of possibility for him to return? Was it from that time that Lin Shi became a pawn of Huang Shi's plan for the future of the human clan? War God wasn't sure about this. But he was sure that Huang Shi had already become his destiny in the later stage of the War of God's investiture. In other words, he was sure that if Huang Shi wanted to, he could see himself in Di Zhou's destiny. He might not see it clearly, but what he saw should be enough for him to make some kind of decision. If this speculation was true, Huang Shi didn't completely kill Di Zhou back then. If everything continued to this day, it seemed to point in one direction. New authority. Without Lin Shi, War God believed that he would also study new authority, but the new authority he expected might not be like this. So, Lin Shi was born in War God's realm, but his future was completely cut off. All of this was just a hint given to him by Huang Shi through Di Zhou's real brand countless years ago. What he wanted to say was the new authority he was studying right now correct? Was it really so? War God was silent. Before the end of the world, his predecessor and Huang Shi were the best friends. And now he had become War God. Huang Shi became Li Tianlan. Before Li Tianlan completely returned, War God wasn't sure what Huang Shi saw in Di Zhou's destiny. His speculation seemed a little incredible. But when he studied the new authority to this point, combined with Lin Shi's state, everything could be explained clearly. At least for now, this was the most reasonable explanation. "Father, is there no other way?" Lin Shi asked, unwilling to give up. "Yes." War God's voice was low, "That's why I asked you to come to Miracle City." "What is the specific way?" Lin Shi was shocked. The black clothes of all worlds fluttered slightly. A dazzling sword Shi appeared in front of War God and Lin Shi. This sword Shi crossed time and space, but it still had a boiling sharpness. This was Lin Shi's sword Shi. War God looked over this sword Shi, looked at his son, and asked slowly, "If I let you give up everything, are you willing?" Chapter 1307. Give up everything, Lin Shi muttered to himself. His expression was confused and doubtful. The War God looked at him calmly. "What else can I give up?" Lin Shi suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. The identity of the Prince of the War God world? From the starry sky to the Miracle City, no one knew about the War God world. He only had the apostles and saints who had accompanied and protected him since he was young. No one knew, which meant that this identity didn't exist. The love of his parents? The War God just said that even if he could see his mother, it would be after the next reincarnation. At that time, Lin Shi wasn't even sure if he was still himself. The hope of the War God world? From a martial artist to an Azura, he sang all the way and then stopped. What hope did the War God world have for him? Other than this, what else could he have? Lin Shi suddenly realized that other than this, he really didn't have anything else in his life. He had been working hard in the field of martial arts since he was young. He wasn't even close to his brothers and sisters. The so-called friends were only the apostles and saints around him. As for love, Lin Shi hadn't met a woman who could move his heart yet. What could he give up if he gave up everything? For example, the War God looked at him silently. "Your martial arts." It was like a bolt of lightning rolling over his head. Lin Shi's hands trembled. He raised his head and looked at the War God. The War God's voice was very calm. "Because of the true imprint, your martial arts aren't perfect. In that case, why don't you give up completely?" "I don't understand." Lin Shi frowned and said with some resistance. Without martial arts, in the Miracle City, without apostles and saints around him, he didn't even have the ability to protect himself. As an Azura, even if he was suppressed in the real world, he was still a perfect genius. How could he be willing to be a person who didn't even have the ability to protect himself? And Lin Shi was confused about the War God's order for him to come to the Miracle City. Complete death was the beginning of a new life. No one understood the meaning of this sentence. His father wanted him to die in the hands of His Majesty Li Tianlan. But Lin Shi never understood what dying in Li Tianlan's hands had to do with his return. If he could return after dying in Li Tianlan's hands, the returnees would not be so valuable. No matter how perfect the true brand was, it could not do that. So even now, Lin Shi was still a bit confused about why the battle god wanted him to come to Miracle City. Be it in the past or now, or even if Huang Shi returns and recovers to her peak state, no one can complete the true brand on your body. You can't do it yourself either. The true brand is incomplete, which is equivalent to cutting off all the paths you can choose. This was originally something that could allow you to reach the peak, but now it has become something that will cut off your future. The battle god's voice was clear and decisive. Since that's the case, why don't you just give up on your true imprint? I can't complete the true imprint, but breaking it isn't difficult at all. Lin Shi stared blankly at the War God, not saying anything. The reason why I let you come to the Miracle City is that in this state, only Li Tianlan can completely obliterate your true brand. What about me? Lin Shi asked. If he really did have the true brand, once the true brand was broken, he would lose all the authority he had now. If the true brand completely disappeared, the only result would be death. Not only him, even Huang Shi and the current great Emperor Xianyuan would completely die once the true brand disappeared. Lin Shi didn't see the possibility of him returning. You will die. The battle god explained patiently, but you will live in the memories of Huang Shi and Shi Bai. The corner of Lin Shi's mouth twitched crazily. For a moment, he didn't know what to say at all. What the hell is living in the memories? I'm dead, but in their hearts, I'm still alive? What are memories? The battle god smiled and asked, or looking at it from another perspective, are the so-called memories real or illusory? This question was very simple, but also very complicated. Memories were the past. Everyone could remember what had just happened not long ago. But who could really be completely sure that what had just happened really happened? If the things in those memories didn't actually happen, then what were memories? If the things in the memories really happened, then compared to the present, were those things real or illusory? This was a question that sounded normal, but the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. There was a theory in the starry sky at present. The Big Bang happened 1 minute ago. Memories, time, life, everything was illusory. This theory was not mainstream, but from this point of view, the so-called memories were naturally the purest illusory. Lin Shi was silent. He was silent for a long time before he slowly said, memories are the past. Yes, they were the past. This answer might not be correct, but it was definitely not wrong. The battle god nodded and suddenly said, do you understand Li Tianlan's current kendo? Lin Shi was stunned. Real and illusory. He replied. And light and darkness. The battle god's voice was gentle, this is his own kendo, which has been separated from the 24 moves of sword. Real, illusory, light, and darkness. This is the essence of the starry sky, so his kendo, even at level 9, can be called the peak. On the way of kendo, these 4 sword intents will slowly evolve, and finally reach a perfect balance at level 9. 9, and then transform into pure reality. Huang Shi's position in the neutral camp is needless to say. He has created 3 kinds of authorities, but they all point to reality in the end. He believes that the human clan is between the neutral camp and the shadow camp. The process of going to the peak is the process of going from illusory to reality. With the brand of reality, the influence of the will of the world will be greatly weakened. When the will of the world can't do anything to the peak masters, the world can only continue to strengthen the camp of order to completely destroy the neutral camp. But the brand of reality is not the end, and neither is the level 9. 9 authority. Huang Shi believes that after the level 9 authority, he can continue to move forward. That is the ultimate transformation. The brand of reality will be completely perfect. The most perfect brand of reality will not exist. At that time, what will appear will be pure and real people. They won't be affected by the will of the world, won't be restrained by the world, and can ignore any attacks from other camps because they are real. Illusory things have no meaning to them. This is the real invincible in the starry sky. At this point, he can really lead the human clan to live safely and even defeat this world. So every authority he creates will eventually point to reality. Now I have a level 9 authority in martial arts. I can even confidently say that if we only compete with the authority of martial arts and not other things, even Huang Shi at his peak may not be stronger than me now. But I still haven't found a way to transform into reality in the field of martial arts. Lin Shi was shocked. He knew that this was the path of the battle god. The battle god didn't want to accept other authorities. He wanted to walk to the end in martial arts and smash the barrier that only existed in theory. He wanted to surpass the authority and become reality. At that time, the authority of martial arts would no longer have any meaning to him. Absolute reality was invincible in the illusory world. But listening to the battle god's words now, Lin Shi hesitated and said softly, "Father, you don't agree with His Majesty Huang Shi's ideals?" There is no such thing as agreeing or disagreeing. The battle god was silent for a while before he said indifferently, I agree with transforming into reality. The path is different, but the end point is the same. The only difference between us is the choice. In fact, I will also compromise. The so-called supremacy has no right to be willful. In martial arts, when I can't see the future for the time being, I refuse to reincarnate and won't accept any other authority. But this doesn't mean that I won't make other choices. My condition is very good, so I think that standing at this height, I can walk the path that I think is right. He wasn't sure if everything in front of him was a hint that Huang Shi gave him through Emperor Zhou's fate. But at this point, whether it was a hint or not was no longer important. The battle god raised his hand. A black dot of light appeared in front of him. The black dot of light was extremely small, and it kept spinning in front of the father and son. At this moment, without any warning, the battle god's figure suddenly became much more real, and his aura also became more lively. Lin Shi's body shook violently. Although the battle god at this moment was still a projection, in a sense, he could be considered the real body. Or rather, it was a part of the real body. If it was just a projection without any fighting strength, in that case, the war god in front of him now had an indistinct aura of a killing god that was suppressed by the real environment. The battle god was currently on the battlefield. Without a doubt, at this moment, he was distracted. Countless blood appeared in patches on his black dragon robe, and a large number of hideous wounds kept spreading along his body. The blood-soaked battle god calmly looked at the black dot of light in front of him and said indifferently, I'll ask you again, do you regret it? Lin Shi took a deep breath. If he regretted it, he could go back now, back to the god of war's realm, back to his mother, and become the 11th prince of the god of war's realm again, unable to make any progress for the rest of his life. If he didn't regret it, he would die in the miracle city, die in the hands of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai, and live in their memories. Lin Shi had no time to think. He could clearly feel that the moment the battle god was distracted, his mind came here, and the state of the battle god on the battlefield of the stars began to plummet. Lin Shi smiled and said softly, I dare not regret it. This was the last chance. This was the last answer. He didn't know what would happen next, but he was sure that something would happen next. The sword energy that belonged to Li Dongqing in the battle god's hand disappeared. A subtle and imperceptible sword energy flew out of his hand and merged into the black dot of light in front of him. The black dot of light shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. No, it didn't shrink. It was an illusion caused by the darkness becoming deeper. The dot of light was still spinning, and its color was deepening. The purer and purer black seemed to be transforming into the ultimate black. In the visual effect, the black dot of light was getting smaller and smaller. Lin Shi watched quietly. The dot of light with the battle god's sword energy gradually turned into an indescribable color. As the color became purer and purer, it suddenly disappeared at a certain moment. Lin Shi's heart suddenly sank for a moment. The black turned into nothingness. No, the black reached the extreme and became transparent. No, the black reached the extreme, it turned into light. An incomparably dazzling light burst out in an instant. A tiny dot of light appeared in front of Lin Shi. The dot of light was spinning wildly, and each ray of light carried an incomparably awe-inspiring sharpness. The endless light completely enveloped Lin Shi's body. The unimaginable pain seemed to be crazily cutting his soul. Lin Shi gritted his teeth. He held on for 2 seconds, and finally couldn't help roaring wildly. The real environment began to shake. The battle god's sword energy burst out of the dot of light, and it was tearing Lin Shi's body and consciousness little by little. Lin Shi's thought center had no time to analyze the current situation. The alarm only sounded for a moment, and then it was completely broken. The battle god's sword energy kept penetrating, deep into the skin, deep into the bones, deep into the blood, and tearing every cell in his body. Lin Shi could clearly hear the sound of his body shattering. The 3 divine forms in his body that were equivalent to his extra life were completely shattered. His authority began to decrease. His power was stripped away bit by bit. Sword intent, sword energy, sword path, everything that had supported him until now was as fragile as a piece of paper in front of the battle god's sword energy, turned into scraps of paper, and turned into nothingness. The world will in his body that was used to temper the sword energy to increase his authority didn't have time to counterattack after losing the sword energy before it was completely torn apart by the surging sword light. It was like falling from a high altitude. A crazy fall. Lin Shi clearly felt a strong sense of weightlessness amidst the tearing pain. All of his martial path authority, divine forms, and characteristics were constantly being shattered by the battle god's sword energy, falling all the way from level 8 to level 7, level 6, level 5, level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1. The battle god shattered his martial path, turning him from an Asura into a normal person. Lin Shi was muddle-headed, and his body kept trembling. In his blurred vision, he saw a sword light appear in his father's hand again. It was a sword energy that contained part of Li Dongqing's state of mind. The sword energy was like water, leaving the battle god's hand, slowly flowing and seeping into his body. His body began to instinctively guide this wisp of sword energy. The battle god's sword energy disappeared. The battle god turned back into a projection, and part of his mind returned to the main body. Lin Shi's body was trembling, constantly taking deep breaths. His aura gradually stabilized, and the Asura body instinctively merged with the sword energy. Lin Shi's aura began to recover. Level 1 authority, Level 2 authority, Level 3 authority. The sword energy supported his aura to continue to rise. In a daze, Lin Shi saw one scene after another. Sad, pitiful, difficult, hopeless, angry, glorious, fearful, his state of mind didn't fluctuate at all. It wasn't like his heart was still water. It was a kind of true deathly stillness without any ripples. This deathly stillness perfectly merged with the sword energy. His aura finally stabilized. Lin Shi forced himself to sit up straight, feeling his own state. His martial path was destroyed by the battle god himself, but he was able to accommodate that sword energy. By the standards of the miracle city, his strength now surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. However, he was still half a step away from that so-called supreme realm. Such combat prowess no longer came from his authority, but from the sword chi. The battle god looked at Lin Shi. He looked at him quietly. Lin Shi closed his eyes. Was it painful? Did he regret it? He might have such emotions. No, he felt that he should have them. But his mood now was silent, and he couldn't feel anything for a while. He felt the sword energy that merged with him. He also felt the battle god's sword intent. The battle god's sword energy had left, but the sword intent was still circulating in his mind. The subtle sword energy circulated again, and finally became an extremely complicated symbol. Such a symbol was not any text. But the moment he realized this symbol, Lin Shi understood the meaning of this symbol. Level 1 authority, Traveler. Lin Shi suddenly raised his head and looked at the battle god. When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. The battle god whispered, "This is your future path." Chapter 1308. Traveler. Traveler, Lin Shi silently sensed the symbols in his mind. An even more intense impact than before surged into him, almost completely destroying his rationality. The symbol kept changing in his mind. To be exact, it was constantly being perfected. The frequent lines and denser patterns made the whole symbol more and more gorgeous, complicated, and mysterious in his mind. Level 1 authority, Traveler. Among the 7.5 authorities that could lead one to the top in the 3 camps, none of them started with Traveler. He couldn't even find a word that was similar to this title. Lin Shi forced himself to calm down, but his voice was still trembling. Is this a new authority? The god of war nodded. Lin Shi's mind was in turmoil. If a new authority matured, the neutral camp would have a brand new path to the top. There would be countless people on this path. They would be active in every corner of the starry sky and play different roles in different battlefields. This was an unimaginable feat since the human race stepped into the starry sky. There was a second pioneer after Huang Shi. No matter what the final outcome was, it was undeniable that the god of war had opened a brand new future for the human race and even the entire neutral camp. Lin Shi examined the symbol in his mind again. The symbol that represented the new authority was extremely gorgeous and dazzling. It was a clear image, but it felt a little illusory. Lin Shi could only know that the initial name of the new authority was Traveler. But he had no idea what ability it had or how to advance. Lin Shi hesitated and said softly, "Father, the new authority. What authority will it have?" Every line of authority had its main authority, which was the limit of authority. In other words, it was something that could be grasped after level 9. Only by grasping authority could one be called a true sovereign, and only then would one have the right to be called His Majesty. Those who did not grasp authority could only be called king. When the god of war and the human sovereign founded the god of war's realm and the human sovereign palace, they didn't have the authority yet, but their true imprint was perfect. The increase in combat power brought by the true imprint had brought them close to this level. That was why the great Emperor Xianyuan of the Time Corridor cooperated with them and allowed the god of war's realm and the human sovereign palace to appear. In different times and spaces, the god of war and the human sovereign finally had the authority. At that moment, they were truly worthy of being called His Majesty. The martial artist's authority was slaughter. Meanwhile, Apocalypse, the one with the highest authority in the Order faction, had the authority of destruction. What would the new authority be? Amidst the drifting blood mist, the war god seemed to squint his eyes. Xianyuan Wuxiang had asked the same question not long ago. The god of war's answer was to kill and destroy. This was a combination of the god of slaughter and the doomsday authority, which showed the god of war's arrogance. Xianyuan Wuxiang's behavior was normal at the time, but the god of war could feel the ninth prince's disapproval. It was conceivable that if the god of war had told him the truth, Xianyuan Wuxiang would not only have disapproved, but would have thought the god of war had gone completely mad. Omniscient, omnipotent. The war god's light voice rang in Lin Shi's ears like thunder. How is this possible? Lin Shi's pupils contracted to the extreme and he shook his head subconsciously. This is impossible. The importance of a new authority in the starry sky could not be overstated. A new authority that could reach the peak must have someone who reached the peak. Because no one knew about the appearance of a new authority, when it first appeared, it was often the most incomprehensible and the most powerful authority. As time passed, the power of the new authority would slowly decrease. When the mysterious veil of the new authority was completely removed, the power of the new authority would disappear. Her Majesty Huang Shi had created 3 types of authority. The first authority was the martial path, which was the earliest authority that the neutral faction had. It was also the most difficult period for the neutral faction. At that time, the human race had not yet obtained the most important foundation, the world's end. The reason the human race had not been destroyed was because of the support of the new authority. After the martial path, the 2 new authorities appeared one after another. When the new authority had the greatest advantage, the human race had held on for a long time. It was only when they obtained the world's end that they barely had a chance to survive. Those who were able to reach the peak of authority were naturally not weak. Different authorities had different functions in different situations. However, as far as Lin Shi knew, there was no authority that could truly be omniscient and omnipotent. The Apocalypse could get close to this. Theoretically, it could be done by the unknown. However, in reality, omniscient and omnipotent, omnipotent, everywhere. This was the authority that all the authorities in the Order faction combined. And now, Father's new authority, a single authority could stand shoulder to shoulder with the entire Order faction? Nothing is impossible, the war god said calmly. The war god calmly said, not in the past doesn't mean it doesn't exist now. When you were young, I told you a principle. In this world, there is nothing that is impossible. It mainly depends on what price you are willing to pay. Lin Shi's mind was still a little muddled. He muttered, "What kind of price do I have to pay for this authority?" The war god was silent for a moment, then said softly, "This new authority is different from all other authorities. It is the complete opposite of any authority that the neutral faction has ever known." Lin Shi was stunned for a moment. "This also means that when you accept this authority, you won't be able to obtain any other authority. This is the only authority you can have. Of course, the authority of this authority is omniscient and omnipotent. So, with this authority, you can also do the things that other authorities can do. However, at the same time, this also means that the difficulty of your advancement is extremely high. It might even exceed your greatest expectations. The authorities could not be combined. The war gods seemed to like to be single. Well, except for women, Great Emperor Xianyuan of the space-time corridor had obtained several types of authorities in several reincarnations. He had become the strongest person in the neutral faction. Huang Shi had the authority of all the authorities in the neutral faction. The human emperor was also preparing to reincarnate and accept other authorities. Only the war god refused to reincarnate. The new authority he created was also a single path. Lin Shi's heart moved slightly. He looked at the war god and said softly, "Father has created a new authority. Don't you plan to? I have no other way." The war god shook his head and said calmly, "I can create a new authority, but it's difficult for me to use it specifically. At most, I can only make use of some of its characteristics. So, there may be some problems with this authority. What I can provide now is only theory. Maybe you will have to walk ahead of me when it comes to real practice." Now that the war god had touched the martial Dao authority, he couldn't touch the new authority he created. It was already the limit for him to make use of some special abilities of the new authority. It's not just because of the problem of my martial Dao authority. The biggest problem is the real mark. Huang Shi's authority is a process of moving from illusion to reality. Everyone can have the real mark after reaching level 9 authority. After reaching level 9, they can touch the authority and then continue to rush toward reality. This is the right path, but there is no definite hope at the moment. So, I have confirmed the path of the new authority. The new authority is going against the flow. If it doesn't work from illusion to reality, what about from illusion to illusion? When illusion reaches the extreme, will it turn into reality? The war god's voice paused. When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. I have the real mark. It's impossible for me to touch the new authority now. I can only wait for an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Lin Shi's heart skipped a beat. Samsara. The war god said lightly, "I won't enter samsara." However, the Xianyuan guild will deceive time the instant they enter world's end, stretching that instant to tens of thousands of years. That way, I will have time to consider my future. By then, I will have the strength to erase my true imprint and gain access to the new authority. Or perhaps, there are other options. Lin Shi carefully felt the symbols in his mind and remained silent. I have shattered your real brand. But because the new authority goes from illusory to more illusory, you can't study it at the moment. So far, only Li Tianlan can completely erase your real brand. Without the real brand, you will live in the memory of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai and become illusory. At that time, you can officially get in touch with the new authority. Live in the memory, Lin Shi smiled bitterly. He still didn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Memory is the foundation of the new authority. The war god said lightly. The martial artist authority needed a body, the fraud authority needed lies, the doomsday authority needed knowledge, and the new authority needed memory. This was the foundation. At present, the new authority is not mature. I have left the seed of the new authority in your mind. It can guarantee that the moment your real mark is broken, you will become a traveler. This is the key to your return. In the future, my thoughts about the new authority will be stored in the seed of authority in your mind, and this. War God gestured at the unknown soul fragment. However, you can use this doomsday seed to create a super thinking center. This will reduce the difficulty of the promotion of the new authority. You can even modify the immature parts of the new authority. So far, what I can confirm is only the first 4 levels of authority. I will think about the rest, but you will need to use this super thinking center to slowly explore. Your condition is very special. If you want to break through the level 8 authority and the true imprint on you, you have to destroy the true imprint and gain access to the new authority. This is your only way. Lin Shi nodded. War God looked at the soul fragment in his hand and sighed softly. Unknown soul fragment, Doomsday's authority seed. If this thing is transformed into a super thinking center, its effect will probably not be inferior to the world halo. I have a feeling that this thing will play a great role in your future. No need to feel pity that you can't become the Doomsday. I can be sure that when the new authority reaches its peak, its power will definitely not be inferior to the Doomsday. Omniscient and omnipotent authority, Lin Shi sighed. His voice was trembling. If he could really become omniscient and omnipotent, wouldn't it not be inferior to the Doomsday? If the new authority matured, what would it mean if he could really control this authority? This meant that what War God created was not just a new authority. It was equivalent to creating a faction. Just like how Her Majesty Huang Shi created the neutral faction. This authority was equivalent to the combination of several authorities. Its promotion might be many times more difficult than other authorities, but if the Doomsday Authority seed could be transformed into a super thinking center, it could greatly reduce the difficulty of the new authority's promotion. The previous basic authorities had been confirmed, and the most difficult part of the new authority had been solved. Lin Shi believed in his father's wisdom and vision, so he could naturally fully believe in his theory. This also meant that as long as the real imprint on him was completely erased by His Majesty Li Tianlan, his future would be bright. He might even become the first person with the new authority. Could he surpass his father? Lin Shi glanced at War God and was a little eager. War God was his most admired and also the one he wanted to surpass the most. War God chuckled and said softly, "It's a good thing to have ambition." Lin Shi grinned. He knew very well what was waiting for him. A new authority based on memory. Death was the real beginning. The omniscient and omnipotent authority could completely support a faction, which meant that although there was only one authority created by War God, it was no worse than the current 3 authorities of the neutral faction. War God and Huang Shi were 2 completely different choices, 2 different paths. Based on His Majesty Huang Shi's original environment, he couldn't play like War God, so he could only create a relatively single authority. Only in this way could the human clan quickly become stronger. Because this kind of authority was relatively easy to get started, but a single authority was a weakness, so His Majesty Huang Shi created 3 types of authorities. And now the human clan already had the authority to struggle for survival. War God himself was an extreme and pure person, so he only studied one authority. Omniscient and omnipotent meant that it was not a single authority, which also meant that the difficulty of promotion was ridiculously high and extremely dangerous. But once he reached the peak, such authority was enough to represent a faction. Lin Shi stood up, bowed deeply to War God, and said respectfully, "Thank you, Father. Don't let me down." The God of War looked at him deeply. "I've abolished your martial arts authority, but you now have a strand of Li Dongqing's sword qi in your body. This sword qi contains a portion of Li Dongqing's state of mind. This means that you can use this sword qi to break through again. Now your biggest advantage is gone, but don't let Li Tianlan leave you too far behind. If he squashes you like an ant, everything we're talking about today will be meaningless. You have to be that couple's opponent. You have to be their most unforgettable opponent. Make them remember you deeply. You can understand this as the prerequisite for becoming a traveler and officially coming into contact with the new authority." Chapter 1309. At 9:00 in the morning, 2 black off-road vehicles covered with mud slowly drove into Xianyuan City. It was a new day, and Xianyuan City had entered its own rhythm. Since 2 years ago, there had only been one rhythm in Xianyuan City. That was construction. It had changed from a poor town to a huge construction site. With the support of massive funds, the construction site continued to expand and spread, turning into a city and a garden. The earth-shaking changes had not stopped. Instead, they were getting faster and faster. Today, the area of Xianyuan City had nearly doubled, and the edges were still being built. The streets of Xianyuan City were wide and clean. The dirty off-road vehicle drove on the street, bringing with it an aura that was incompatible with the entire city. The off-road vehicles were full of people. A middle-aged man in his 50s looked at the garden-like city outside through the mud spots on the window. His eyes were complicated and in a trance. The atmosphere in the car was quiet. The off-road vehicles drove quietly on the streets. After a long time, the middle-aged man with complicated eyes laughed at himself. I suddenly feel really old, like a bumpkin who has never seen the world. But if I hadn't come here with my own eyes, I really couldn't believe that there was such a city in Tiannan. Yes, it's unreasonable, to be honest, I haven't realized it yet. It's really beautiful. This scene is even more exaggerated than that year. Isn't it? Zhuanyuantai was also excellent in those days. There were pavilions and terraces, but they were built on Kunlun Mountain, surrounded by snow and lifeless. But this is a city, I'm afraid it will become a province in the future. In the constant discussion in the car, Li Huazhang, who spoke first, was in a trance and murmured to himself, how much does it cost? Since entering Xianyuan City, Li Huazhang's biggest impression of this place was only one word. Luxury. The purgatory of heaven capital was also rich, very rich. Li Guangtu was able to support the purgatory of heaven capital by relying on some of the industries left after the Li family's destruction. He controlled at least 30% of the Li family's financial resources, which was the foundation to ensure the development of the purgatory of heaven capital. Li Huazhang and others were not short of money, but they had never thought that money could be spent in this way. Ordinary people bought cars and houses. Rich people invested in businesses. None of this was a big deal. However, to be rich enough to build a city, or even a province, this kind of thing had completely exceeded the wildest imagination of everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital. Money is just a number in the eyes of Emperor Dong's palace. The driver smiled and said, I've been to Xianyuan City once. His Majesty doesn't just want a city. He wants to build a province. But when it comes to Xianyuan City, he only wants a garden. Have we seen any high-rise buildings since we entered the city? The people in the car fell silent at the same time. Thinking back carefully, since they entered the city until now, there really weren't any high-rise buildings in Xianyuan City. On both sides of the wide streets, behind large areas of flowers and greenery, there were clusters of buildings with their own characteristics. Most of them weren't high, seeming to be 6 or 7 stories high, but usually only had 3 or 4 stories of space, which was almost a waste of living space. What was shown was the exquisiteness and magnificence of each building. There were indeed no skyscrapers here. But the whole city looked like a whole. The driver smiled in a low voice. Among them, in the past 2 years, only he had been to Xianyuan City, so he knew more about it. It is said that when Xianyuan City was first built, Emperor Dong's palace invited hundreds of designers from all over the world. Many of them were leading masters in the industry. They brainstormed, and the basic design cost was more than 9 figures. Every building in Xianyuan City was carefully planned. The inner city and the outer city were clearly defined. When Emperor Dong's palace really develops in the future, the whole city will become a forbidden area of the dark world, and it will also become a paradise for everyone in Emperor Dong's palace. If the provincial capital of Tiannan belongs to Zhongzhou State in the future, then Xianyuan City will completely belong to Emperor Dong, whom we will be loyal to. If that day comes, the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace will not be built in Xianyuan City, but the whole Xianyuan City will be the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. Everyone in the car was excited and yearning. Everyone's paradise, Li Huazhang murmured and sighed softly. I'm afraid it's not just a paradise. The driver shook his head. At the same time, it will also be a war fortress of Emperor Dong's palace. Many things in Xianyuan City are left blank, so although it looks beautiful now, some places are very abrupt. I guess there should be a lot of places to store weapons. This situation is not very obvious in the outer city at present. When I have time to walk around in the inner city, I will have a deeper understanding. How do you know this? Li Huazhang was a little confused. I accidentally heard from Guangta that once Xianyuan City is completely built, it will be able to deal with any regular battles of any scale. The parliament has discussed this in private many times in the past 2 years, and they are very afraid of it. But so far, no one has clearly raised this issue. At present, the outer city of Xianyuan City is still being expanded. When it is completely built and the weapon system is set up, there will be another big game. The driver said calmly. Li Huazhang was silent. There were 2 cars and 10 people. Together, they were the top think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Huazhang was now an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Among the 10 of them, the one with the lowest realm had no realm and was an ordinary person who didn't know martial arts at all. Compared with martial arts, they were more willing to believe in their own brains. If what the driver said was true, then after they joined Emperor Dong's palace, they should start planning for this matter in advance. To build a paradise that belonged only to Emperor Dong's palace and the Li family. Since Li Tianlan dared to think so and was doing it, they had no reason not to do their best for it. Outer city, inner city, what do you mean? Li Huazhang asked. The driver, who was second only to Li Huazhang in the think tank, but he had to drive himself because of motion sickness, stepped on the accelerator and speeded up. He smiled and said, "We've arrived at the inner city." The off-road vehicle went all the way down into the tunnel. The lights were bright, and cars were coming and going. After driving in the tunnel for less than a minute, the space in the tunnel suddenly became empty. There were many but orderly signs in front of them, and they had a very clear sense of direction. In their sight was a 2-way 10-lane underground highway. The side walls on both sides were not completely closed. The alloy side walls reinforced the building structure to the greatest extent. As the off-road vehicle moved forward, Li Huazhang and others saw traffic lights, crossroads, and parking lots. There were not many cars shuttling back and forth underground. In the off-road vehicle, everyone was completely silent. What appeared in front of them was a transportation network that was completely underground but extended in all directions. What? What is this? Li Huazhang whispered. Another Xingzhou city. The driver's voice was very calm. There are no roads or traffic lights on the ground of the inner city. There are lawns and gardens everywhere, as well as ornamental paths for people to walk. All vehicles travel underground and can reach any corner of the inner city. People on the ground don't have to worry about cars coming and going, and cars underground don't have to worry about crowds. The combination of these 2 aspects makes the inner city of Xianyuan City. If you look at it separately, the underground is the traffic, and the ground is the garden. It can't be said to be a city. This prodigal, Li Huazhang muttered to himself absent-mindedly. The pros and cons of such a city were 2 extremes. The pros were obvious. The traffic was convenient, it was green and environmentally friendly. Additionally, it was extremely safe. Traffic accidents like car collisions in other cities would never happen here. On the whole, such a design structure basically prevented the possibility of large-scale armed forces attacking the inner city of Xianyuan City. In the case that people could not travel on the ground and could only travel underground, no matter how many people came, as long as the underground traffic network was shut down, it was like catching a turtle in a jar. The whole city had eliminated most of the hidden dangers because of such a division of the ground and underground. Li Huazhang could imagine the sense of security in the hearts of people living in the inner city. But the disadvantages were also very obvious. The first was the cost, the second was the cost, and the third was the damn cost. Jianghu state was the most powerful country in the world. But even so, there were only 2 such cities in the whole Jianghu state. The first was Xingzhou City in Beihai, and the second was today's Xianyuan City. Even in Huading and Yuzhou, no one was willing to spend so much money on infrastructure construction. They could not afford it at all. Li Huazhang had been to Xingzhou City and seen the unforgettable urban environment. But the Xianyuan city he saw now was even more extravagant than Xingzhou city. Is it really that they have too much money to spend? Li Huazhang said with some confusion. Yes. The driver nodded as if it was a fact. Li Huazhang had nothing to say. Emperor Dong's palace, the Flourishing Age Fund. How rich was Han Donglu? This question had been speculated many years ago. Now, the question should be how rich Li Tianlan was. The capital power behind the Flourishing Age Fund was hard to imagine, not to mention ordinary people. Even the so-called wealthy families could not imagine it. The Flourishing Age Fund not only had a lot of industries, but also had a terrifying cash flow that could completely set off a financial storm at any time. The various industries all over the world meant that the Flourishing Age Fund was creating profits almost every minute and every second. This also meant, no matter how much he struggled, unless he encountered some crises that could endanger the world, such as the end of the world, he could never spend as fast as he could make money. Li Huazhang suddenly thought of Li Guangtu. No wonder his cousin was so jealous of him that he almost lost his mind. Compared with the wealth of Emperor Dong's palace, the purgatory of heaven capital was so shabby that it could not be said to be a beggar. But in comparison, the purgatory of heaven capital was really as poor as a small workshop. Inner city, outer city, the driver sighed softly. I can probably understand His Majesty's plan. He wants to build a city that only belongs to the Li family, a carefree paradise. In the future, Tiannan may be very prosperous, but Xianyuan City will become the quietest and most comfortable city in the whole Zhongzhou state. In such a Xianyuan city, in the future, the armed forces of Emperor Dong's palace will live in the outer city, and the families of the soldiers will live in the inner city, so that we will never have to worry about anything. Such a life, this is Tianlan's promise to the Li family. A low and deep voice suddenly rang out. Beside Li Huazhang, a middle-aged man with an eye patch suddenly laughed. He made a promise to the Li family when he was very young. I still remember it. Li Huazhang was silent, just calmly looking at the lights on the ground outside the window. Why don't you say anything, leader? The one-eyed man asked. I'm thinking. Li Huazhang calmly said, thinking about how to let such a Li family have a place for me in the future. Chapter 13:10. The car went all the way along the main road in the underground traffic network, without turning or taking a detour. When it reached the end, there was a slight slope on the road. Going up the slope, an extremely wide square appeared in front of the think tanks. The inner city of Xianyuan City was lush like a big garden, but the underground road planning was extremely neat, avoiding fancy and winding to the greatest extent, so the possibility of getting lost was very small. The square at the end of the main road could be said to be the only place on the surface of the inner city of Xianyuan City where cars could be found. The moment the car was about to enter the square, the water column sprayed out from the tires on both sides. The water spread quickly on the car body with the impact, washing away the mud on the car body. Li Huazhang, who was by the window, didn't notice for a moment, and a large amount of water sprayed directly through the half-open window. Li Huazhang was shocked, and several people in the back row also wiped the water on their faces awkwardly and scolded the driver angrily in unison. Why didn't you remind us? The driver held the steering wheel and rolled his eyes. I haven't been to this square, how would I know? It's probably an automatic car washing device. Li Huazhang looked out of the window with the corner of his mouth twitching. Outside the window, the flat and wide square was clean and tidy, surrounded by a lush forest, and there was only one entrance to the square. Looking along the entrance, it was a straight passage. The heavy and almost towering gate of Emperor Dong's palace was at the end of the passage. The atmosphere in the car gradually became quiet. The two SUVs slowed down at the same time. The sound of the car horn behind the car rang. The SUVs subconsciously gave way. A black Volkswagen belonging to the inner city of Xianyuan City slowly drove over. Bathed in the water column, the car turned around after entering the square, and left leisurely. Li Huazhang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." The driver said yes, and his voice was a little dry. At this moment, the mood of everyone in the two cars was extremely complicated. From the purgatory of heaven capital to Emperor Dong's palace. It seemed to be a distance of hundreds of miles, but after the change of position, they would face a completely different life. They didn't know what Li Tianlan would do to them next. They were the top think tank of the purgatory of heaven capital, and Li Huazhang was their team leader. Their voices had never been unified, and their stances had never been the same. Li Huazhang was completely loyal to Li Honghe. Although the old man had died, he was still a bright light and faith in his heart. He fully believed in Li Honghe's judgment and vision without any doubt. After Li Honghe handed the Li family over to Li Tianlan, Li Huazhang's mind was naturally not in the purgatory of heaven capital. He was a real member of the Li family and did not have the idea of being independent. In the past 2 years, people from the purgatory of heaven capital had been joining Emperor Dong's palace. Their mentality was almost the same. They could not change Li Guangtu, but at least they could represent themselves and let themselves enter Li Tianlan's camp. Li Huazhang was different. He had always felt that he was in Li Tianlan's camp. Not only himself, but also everything in the purgatory of heaven capital should belong to Li Tianlan. So the reason why he hadn't joined Emperor Dong's palace for more than 2 years since Li Honghe's death was to persuade Li Guangtu and other people in the purgatory of heaven capital. Several in-depth talks with Li Guangtu were fruitless. The more they talked, the more annoyed Li Guangtu and gradually excluded him, the senior staff officer, from the core high level. Li Huazhang never gave up. He still seized every opportunity to make people in the purgatory of heaven capital approve of Li Tianlan. Among the think tanks, Qian Ji and White Fox were persuaded by him. They were still hesitating, but after the news of Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun's cooperation came, they finally made up their minds and followed him to Emperor Dong's palace. Among the other think tanks, One-Eyed and Qilin left the Li family's camp the latest and were the most familiar with Li Tianlan. From beginning to end, they were on Li Tianlan's side. The others had always maintained a wait-and-see state. They were inclined to the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. They mainly hoped that the Li family would become stronger and did not care about the outcome between the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. In the purgatory of heaven capital, they were a team and made plans for the future of the Li family. But after coming to Emperor Dong's palace, they were likely to get different treatment because of their different mentalities. Li Huazhang did not have to worry. As the core of the Li family, he would be a core member whether in the purgatory of heaven capital or in Emperor Dong's palace. One-Eyed and Qilin also did not have to worry. Their positions were clear. If they joined Emperor Dong's palace, they would definitely be regarded as Li Tianlan's confidants. What about the others? They were think tanks, not good at fighting. Now there were so many talents in Emperor Dong's palace. If they were to be casually thrown into some corner, their so-called talents would be buried. Back to the purgatory of heaven capital? Not to mention that Li Guangtu was dying, their return to the purgatory of heaven capital from Emperor Dong's palace could be regarded as a betrayal. If they went to other forces would also have scruples about them. If there was no place for them in Emperor Dong's palace, their future life would undoubtedly be extremely difficult. The off-road vehicle slowly stopped in front of the gate of Emperor Dong's palace. In front of the gate, there were already 2 rows of elites of Emperor Dong's palace with loaded guns. Dozens of people stood on both sides, forming a pedestrian passage. At the front of the passage, Xiao Mahai stood quietly and watched the 2 off-road vehicles approach. Looking at the badge of the purgatory of heaven capital printed on the body of the off-road vehicles, he narrowed his eyes and smiled. Li Huazhang got off first. In the 2 cars, the top think tanks of the purgatory of heaven capital got off one after another. They looked up at the gate of Emperor Dong's palace in front of them, more or less with some complicated feelings in their eyes. Xiao Mahai looked quietly, motionless, and there was no emotion in his smile. Li Huazhang took a deep breath and took the initiative to step forward. He reached out his hand and said, "Hello, Director Xiao." The chief director of Emperor Dong's palace, no matter what his position was in the dark world, at least in Emperor Dong's palace, he was the core of the core. It could be said that he was the most trusted person. Just like Li Huazhang was the chief steward of the Li family. As long as he was trusted enough, the scope of this director's power was not only limited to the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace, but also to the external affairs of Emperor Dong's palace. "Hello, Advisor Li." Xiao Mahai smiled and reached out to shake hands with Li Huazhang. He was neither arrogant nor enthusiastic, and his sense of distance was obvious. "As soon as you entered the inner city, I got the news that you are all distinguished guests from the Purgatory of Heaven capital. If you come to Emperor Dong's palace, you should inform me in advance so that I can prepare to welcome you." Distinguished guests? Li Huazhang was speechless and laughed at himself. What kind of distinguished guests are we? Director Xiao, you are too polite. Then why are you here? Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes and remained calm. Li Huazhang took a deep look at him and whispered, "We just want to go home." Chapter 13:11. Go home. Xiao Mahai savored the word carefully. His eyes brightened slightly, and his formal smile seemed to be much more natural. Xiao Mahai knew that His Majesty went to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He also knew that Li Tianlan gave the Purgatory of Heaven capital 3 days. It had been more than 20 years since the Li family collapsed. With the rise of Li Tianlan, it was divided into the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace. Now Emperor Dong was invincible in the world, and he was the patriarch appointed by Senior Li before his death. With strength and righteousness, Li Tianlan had no patience to slowly integrate the two sides. He defeated Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun, showed his strength, went to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, explained that he was the future heir of the Li family, and settled the concerns of many people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He had done what he should do. 3 days were enough for the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital who were really willing to stand beside Emperor Dong's palace to make a decision. As for what would happen after 3 days, everyone knew very well. Li Tianlan was the patriarch of the Li family. He had done his best to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Within 3 days, those who came to Emperor Dong's palace from the Purgatory of Heaven capital were on his side, and those who didn't were enemies. Without the shackles of the past, Emperor Dong's edge was invincible in today's dark world. Xiao Mahai was fully prepared for this. He had enough reasons to believe that more and more elites and even high-level officials of the Purgatory of Heaven capital would join Emperor Dong's palace in the next few days. Emperor Dong's palace couldn't control the whole Tiannan, but it had 100% control over Xianyuan city. As soon as the 2 cars with the mark of the Purgatory of Heaven capital entered the outer city of Xianyuan city, Xiao Mahai, as the director, had already received the news. He let them come to the gate of Emperor Dong's palace. Although he was vigilant, he was ready to welcome his own people. But the 2 SUVs still gave him a great surprise. Of course, he knew Li Huazhang. He was the general director of the Li family in its heyday. Many years ago, Great Master Wu Wei called him a crouching dragon. Although he was not a crouching dragon in the historical novel, his ability in internal affairs was absolutely top-notch. It was said that if the Li family hadn't collapsed too suddenly, Li Honghe would have planned to let Li Huazhang enter the official career. If everything went well, now, Li Huazhang would at least be a big shot at the level of a counselor. Not only Li Huazhang, but everyone who got off the 2 SUVs, Xiao Mahai knew them all. One Eye, Kailan, and Hupa were all figures that His Majesty had mentioned in person. Even today, His Majesty still mentioned them in the same way. He still called them 3 uncles. Their future status in Emperor Dong's palace was obvious. Qian Ji, White Fox, Nameless Zi, Qian Zhong, Xiao Mahai was also familiar with these 4 people. Among the 4, Wu Mingzi was a Taoist priest many years ago. After joining the Li family, he still did not change his Taoist name. In terms of strength, he might be the only one among the 10 who could be compared with Li Huazhang. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and also the youngest think tank. Qian Ji was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, while Qian Zhong and White Fox were just ordinary people. From their standpoint, the 4 of them were partial to Li Guangtu, at least before Li Guangtu was captured. In the past few years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital's development, especially after they came to Tiannan and secretly played games with Emperor Dong's palace, the four of them could be said to be the most active figures. Spirit Monkey, Stone Heart, Baiyue, the three of them were relatively neutral in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. They could be seen in a series of decisions made by the Purgatory of Heaven capital to the outside world, but they had never participated in any plan against Emperor Dong's palace. In the matter of the Li family's internal strife, they were the most lenient. It didn't matter who won or lost. What they cared about was the Li family. 10 people. 10 of the best think tanks in the world. They were not famous in the dark world. After all, the highest strength was only at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But no one dared to ignore their role behind the scenes. Each of them was qualified to appear in the confidential intelligence of Emperor Dong's palace. After serving as the general director of Emperor Dong's palace, Xiao Mahai also studied the information of these people. In fact, if they did not come to Emperor Dong's palace in a few days and made their stand clear, then when Emperor Dong's palace attacked the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the first target would be these people. When Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were bound by the rules of Zhongzhou state, the threat of these think tanks was even far greater than that of Daybreak of the Invincible Realm and Dawn of the Top Half-Step Invincible Realm. Xiao Mahai just didn't expect that in such a short period of time, all 10 of them would be here. This was the foundation of the Li family. They appeared here at the same time. Xiao Mahai could completely imagine how shaken the people of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were. For Emperor Dong's palace, this was definitely a good thing. Xiao Mahai's eyes narrowed slightly because of the strong smile. He looked at the 10 think tanks in front of him and said with a smile, "His Majesty has been waiting for this day for a long time. Come with me, everyone. I have informed Secretary Han. She is in the reception room. She is waiting for you." Secretary Han, Li Huazhang was stunned. He knew who Xiao Mahai was talking about. Li Tianlan's current personal secretary, Han Xinyan, was also the young lady of the Flourishing Age Fund and the daughter of the military counselor. Li Tianlan undoubtedly trained her as the next CEO of Emperor Dong's palace. At present, Han Xinyan's performance was not amazing since she served as his personal secretary, but she did not make any mistakes. Although she was young, she was very stable and seemed to be in line with the rules. But when combined with her position, wasn't this another kind of excellence? Li Huazhang hesitated and whispered, "Tianlan. Well, where is His Majesty?" Xiao Mahai was leading the way in front. Hearing this, he raised his hand to look at his watch and said with a smile, "His Majesty should not have gotten up yet." Li Huazhang and the others might not understand. But as the director, Xiao Mahai was very clear that as long as Qin Weibai was there, no matter how early His Majesty and Qin Weibai went to bed, they would get up very late. This was already obvious when Li Tianlan was in the desert prison. Li Huazhang paused slightly and exchanged a look with Qian Ji, who was walking beside him. Qian Ji's expression was very calm. But there was a touch of nervousness in his eyes. Li Tianlan had not gotten up yet. The next person they were going to see was Dong Huang's personal secretary, Han Xinyan. Now that Dong Huang was too lazy to manage things, those who held power and were close to him were the most difficult to deal with. For example, Xiao Mahai in front of them. And for example, Han Xinyan. To some extent, Han Xinyan, the personal secretary who was cultivated as the next CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, could completely represent Li Tianlan's will at some point. When they came to Emperor Dong's palace from the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the first person they met was Xiao Mahai. But from a business point of view, the first person they met was Han Xinyan. Both Xiao Mahai and Han Xinyan had nothing to do with the Li family. They were the top officials of Emperor Dong's palace, not the Li family. Whether Li Tianlan really did not get up or not, it was a fact that he did not show up. Was he going to contact them in the most normal way? Or was he going to put aside the feelings of the Li family for the time being and observe their abilities from the most objective point of view? There was no doubt that this was an interview. Chapter 13:12. When he was with Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan often woke up very early but got up very late. He didn't want to. He was too lazy to move. He was thinking of a hero's grave in the land of tenderness, but he didn't want to lift the quilt. He liked to lie quietly on the soft bed with one arm as his pillow. He squinted slightly, opened the window, and enjoyed the comfortable morning breeze of Emperor Dong's palace, quietly enjoying an undisturbed morning. The snow-white thin quilt puffed up high. Qin Weibai's body hidden in the quilt moved and subconsciously made a whimpering sound. Li Tianlan reached his arm in and touched Qin Weibai's head. He smiled and said, "Tired?" The beauty did not answer. Instead, she reached out and held Li Tianlan's palm. Their fingers clasped tightly. Woo! In the slight sound, Li Tianlan's body suddenly tightened. He closed his eyes and his mind went blank. His soul seemed to leave his body with all his thoughts. It kept rising, flying unscrupulously to the blue sky and white clouds, and then slowly falling back. His body gradually relaxed, and the corners of his mouth rose. Cough, cough, Qin Weibai coughed a little quickly. Li Tianlan subconsciously wanted to lift the quilt, but his palm was grabbed by Qin Weibai. No, cough, don't look. Her body moved, and she climbed out of the quilt, looking down at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan chuckled and played with her messy hair. Qin Weibai's face was red, and her eyes were misty. Her voice was also a little hoarse, and she was indescribably seductive. Are you satisfied? What do you think? Li Tianlan reached out and wiped the corners of Qin Weibai's mouth. Then, he casually wiped the thing in his hand on her hair. Qin Weibai glared at him. She was weak and charming, and said softly, "Pervert." It's human nature. Li Tianlan's expression did not change. Do men like to let women wash them clean and then dirty them with their own hands? Qin Weibai tilted her head and asked. Li Tianlan coughed dryly. That's because I can't help it. I don't believe you. Qin Weibai chuckled and pulled Li Tianlan's face. You are more and more disrespectful to me. You don't care about me, and you only know how to bully me all day. Don't you want me to bear your children? Huh? How did you do it? You know how to sweet talk. I won't believe you anymore. Li Tianlan held her in his arms and said with a smile, I'm a man of my word. How dare you question my sincerity? It seems that I haven't punished you enough. Then, no. Qin Weibai shook her head violently. I want to take a shower. It's so dirty. I want to sleep. I'm so tired. Li Tianlan gently tapped her nose. You haven't eaten yet. Qin Weibai glared at him with some grievance and said in a hoarse voice, I'm full. No, I'm not hungry. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth lifted. Before he could laugh, Qin Weibai had already pinched his waist hard. She took the opportunity to struggle out of bed, put on a loose robe, and walked to the bathroom with light steps. Are you really not going to eat? Li Tianlan sat up in bed. Qin Weibai, who walked a little strangely, opened the bathroom door and snorted. We still need to have lunch. Hurry up and leave, I want to take a nap. You make it sound like you're the only one who loves cleanliness. I want to wash too. Li Tianlan lifted the quilt and got out of bed, approaching Qin Weibai with a smile. Qin Weibai screamed and rushed into the bathroom in a flurry, intending to close the door. Before the door could close, Li Tianlan held it down. His figure squeezed into the bathroom. The high and mighty goddess was begging for something pitifully, and then there was a short, sharp scream. In the scream, the bathroom door was closed. It was already 10:15 in the morning when Han Xinyan's call came in. Qin Weibai curled up in the quilt in a daze. Her beautiful eyes blinked and tried to stare at Li Tianlan. It was sunny outside the window. A breeze blew in, and the bedroom was surrounded by a delicate fragrance with a touch of sunshine. Li Tianlan diligently cleaned up the battlefield. The messy things were put together and broken into countless pieces under the sword energy. He held the phone and learned that the think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital had requested to join Emperor Dong's palace. I got it. Li Tianlan was silent for a while before he said softly. Without giving a definite reply, he hung up the phone, sat down next to Qin Weibai again, and touched her hair. Qin Weibai was still looking at him with resentment. She seemed to be too sleepy to open her eyes, but she didn't sleep. Are you still not convinced? Li Tianlan flicked Qin Weibai's forehead. Qin Weibai snorted, but she didn't dare to provoke him again. Her body curled up subconsciously. Go to sleep. I'll wake you up when it's time to eat. Li Tianlan's voice became gentle. Qin Weibai nodded, tried to open her eyes, and whispered, What happened? Good news. Li Tianlan said with a smile, My uncle came to Emperor Dong's palace with the think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. A flash of light flashed through Qin Weibai's eyes. She tried to keep her eyes open, but now her energy was really not enough to support her to plan anything. Her mind was chaotic, and she was too lazy to think about anything. Purgatory of Heaven capital, Qin Weibai whispered. There's no Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. My uncle brought the news that Li Guangtu officially disbanded the Purgatory of Fanatics and recognized my identity as the patriarch of the Li family. He officially withdrew from the Li family from today. All the industries, armaments, intelligence, resources, and connections of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were unconditionally handed over to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu only took Dawn, Daybreak, Phoenix, and some elites of the Sanluo Temple of the Everlasting, which added up to less than 600 people. In addition, most of the veterans of the Li family are currently on their way to Emperor Dong's palace. A small number of people are guarding the supplies, and they are waiting for me to send someone over to take over the industries of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. These are the news brought by my uncle, but he came earlier and didn't see Li Guangtu make the decision. The news came from the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but I don't think it's fake. There was no point in falsifying such news. Moreover, Li Huaqing was currently in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. If it was fake, Li Huaqing couldn't have kept it a secret. Moreover, Li Guangtu couldn't get anything from the cost of the news. At most, some of the elites sent by Li Tianlan would be buried in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Then Li Tianlan's real body would rush over, and none of them would survive. To say the least, even if Li Guangtu wanted to set up a trap for Li Tianlan now, he didn't have that ability. At least the veterans of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, because of his cooperation with Gu Xingyun, were unlikely to completely obey Li Guangtu's orders. In the near future, some elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital would join Emperor Dong's palace, which was something that Li Tianlan had expected. He just didn't expect the Purgatory of Heaven capital, or Li Guangtu, to do it so thoroughly. The arrival of the think tank was already a surprise. Li Guangtu's decision was equivalent to giving a big cake to Emperor Dong's palace for free. Therefore, Han Xinyan's interview with the think tanks naturally couldn't go on. Now she was also waiting for Li Tianlan to go in person to give the Purgatory of Heaven capital and these think tanks an explanation. Qin Weibai. With a chuckle, she rubbed her face against Li Tianlan's palm and said softly, Li Guangtu admitted defeat. But he didn't beg for mercy. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. That was what Li Guangtu thought of, a relatively good way. He did have feelings for the Li family. He also admitted that the current Emperor Dong's palace far surpassed the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and he also admitted that he had no chance of winning against Li Tianlan. He admitted defeat. But he was still unconvinced. His choice was not to use everything in his hands to fight Li Tianlan to the end. He disbanded the Purgatory of Heaven capital and handed all its assets to Emperor Dong's palace, so that the Li family could be preserved to the greatest extent. And he officially withdrew from the Li family, which meant that Li Guangtu had nothing to do with the Li family in the future. There was no old relationship between him, Li Tianlan, or Emperor Dong's palace. He handed the Li family to Li Tianlan, which meant that he admitted defeat. But he didn't join Emperor Dong's palace, which meant that he was unconvinced. He still had the idea of competing with Li Tianlan for the leadership of the Li family. But he didn't rely on the purgatory of heaven capital. So Li Guangtu had no way out. From the moment he decided to disband the purgatory of heaven capital, he had given up the foundation that had supported him for more than 20 years. Next, he would turn to the parliament of Zhongzhou state, completely unite with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, get rid of him at all costs, and control a complete Li family again. Li Tianlan was very clear about this. Isn't this just right? Qin Weibai said softly, what we need is for him to admit defeat. If he begs for mercy, it will be boring. Her eyes were a little tired, but full of smiles. Since he has broken up with the Li family, we don't need to care about his feelings. Under such circumstances, everyone in the Li family will understand. Since he is still unconvinced and wants to turn to the parliament and cooperate with Gu Xingyun, then no matter what happens to him in the future, he asked for it. It has nothing to do with us. Yes, Li Tianlan whispered, he asked for it. I'm going to sleep first. When I wake up, I have the energy to think about the next situation. Qin Weibai whispered, the resources left by the Li family are still very rich, especially some hidden resources. They don't have the strength to make use of these hidden resources quickly, but the Flourishing Age Fund does. I have to think about it. Go to sleep first. Li Tianlan whispered, I'll go see them first. His fingers gently pinched Qin Weibai's ear. After talking with the academics, the teacher and I can breathe a sigh of relief. The situation we face will stabilize, and military counselor can come back. How to integrate the Flourishing Age Fund with the industry of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, military counselor is the professional in this regard. His voice was getting lower and lower. Qin Weibai tried hard to open her beautiful eyes that silently accused him of last night's brutality. She closed them and fell asleep very sweetly. Li Tianlan leaned over and kissed her face gently. Then he got up and left the bedroom. At this moment, the Li family's think tank was still waiting for him in the living room. Farther away, most of the Li family's veterans belonging to the Purgatory of Heaven capital were moving toward Shenyuan City. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had been disbanded. The core of the Purgatory Legion should have set off at this time, withdrawing from Tiannan in batches. And the power belonging to the Li family was officially gathering in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan walked quietly in the corridor of Emperor Dong's palace castle. Scenes of the past flashed in his mind, from childhood to adulthood, and they were extremely clear. The Li family had collapsed. Today, more than 20 years later, a brand new, holy family would usher in a new starting point. Chapter 1313. The atmosphere in the reception hall was quiet and solemn. Han Xinyan, Emperor Donghuang's personal secretary, sat on the sofa with her legs together. She unconsciously pinched a dried fruit and put it into her rosy mouth. Her eyes flickered slightly, and it was obvious that she was thinking about something sensitive. She was Li Tianlan's personal secretary. But in fact, everyone knew that Han Xinyan was very likely to replace her father, Han Donglu, as the next CEO of Emperor Dong's palace. So Han Xinyan's actual scope of power was ridiculously large. Most of the secrets of Emperor Dong's palace were not secrets in front of her. Han Xinyan would know all the plans made by Emperor Dong's palace in various fields before Li Tianlan saw them. If there was something to do, the secretary would do it. If there was nothing to do, the secretary would do it. Li Tianlan didn't do the second half of the sentence, but she did the best in the first half. So whether in terms of position or actual work, Han Xinyan's appearance was enough for the think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to join Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan met them because of their old friendship. He just wanted to show his face and go through the motions. That was all. Those who were really friends with Li Tianlan, such as the Kailan, Amber, and the One-Eyed, would not talk about the old days with him on such an occasion. The 10 think tanks all had real talents, but they had different standpoints. But now that they had joined Emperor Dong's palace, at least on the surface, Li Tianlan couldn't really be close to them. He would even deliberately ignore the three uncles of Kylan, Amber, and One-Eyed. No one could control what they did in private in the future. But on the first day that the think tank joined Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan would never let them feel that he was an outsider. Therefore, a simple appearance, or at most a meal, was a kind of gesture. How they integrated into Emperor Dong's palace, what role they should play, what work they should do, and what duties they would be assigned, these were Han Xinyan's and their own affairs. So Han Xinyan met them here and arranged a so-called interview. When everything was settled, it was almost lunchtime. At this time, Li Tianlan came to show up. After lunch, they would officially join Emperor Dong's palace. But this process was completely interrupted by the news brought by Li Huazhang. Neither side intended to give each other a show of strength. It was just that this news was too unbelievable. The first thing Li Guangtu, who had been fighting with Emperor Dong's palace not long ago, did after getting out of captivity was to quit the Li family, disband the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and give all the properties of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to Emperor Dong's palace. This feeling was indescribable astonishment and absurdity. What was the Purgatory of Heaven capital? This was a behemoth that had the foundation of a superpower. However, it did not have its own foundation. Strictly speaking, it couldn't be considered a superpower. However, it wasn't any weaker than a superpower. It just lacked a foundation. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was not just the headquarters in Tiandu City, which was pitiful compared to Emperor Dong's palace. How big was the Purgatory of Heaven capital? This was something that even Li Huazhang couldn't say. But what he said was enough to attract Han Xinyan's attention. There were nearly 40 secret bases around the world, including Star State, Germany, France, England, Italy, the Kingdom of Desak, Annan, East Island, Snow Country, Austria, and other countries. There were tens of thousands of talents in various fields. There were 7 high-tech laboratories, including weapons development and gene medicine development. There were companies with total assets of nearly 200 billion yuan. There were intelligence networks in major countries all over the world, all of it. Li Guangtu handed it all over without holding anything back. There was no doubt that this was a big gift, one that Emperor Dong's palace couldn't refuse. Han Xinyan was qualified to arrange most of the think tanks who came to Emperor Dong's palace, and even the other elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital who would join Emperor Dong's palace in the future. But when the whole Purgatory of Heaven capital was in front of her, she had to inform Li Tianlan and let him handle it in person. Time passed quietly. Han Xinyan kept eating melon seeds, and the light in her eyes became brighter and brighter. The heavy door of the reception hall opened silently. Han Xinyan, who had been thinking about how to accept this big gift, immediately stood up. Li Tianlan came in from outside the door. Han Xinyan walked over to him. The think tanks also stood up at the same time. Li Huazhang hesitated and stood where he was without moving. The others didn't move either. Beside Qilin, Wu Mingzi, who used to be a Taoist priest but was no longer a Taoist priest, was still wearing a clean Taoist robe. He squinted slightly and looked at Han Xinyan's graceful back. His eyes fell on the perky buttocks under the close-fitting secretary suit, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. If you dare to look at it again, believe it or not, someone will dig your eyes out right away. Qilin said calmly, "This is Emperor Dong's palace. If you don't change your bad habit, you won't even know how you die. She's not His Majesty's woman." Wu Mingzi chuckled. As His Majesty's personal secretary, she didn't climb into His Majesty's bed. She hasn't succeeded for so long, and the chances of success in the future are not high. She's not looking at the mistress. Is this wrong? His Majesty doesn't care about you. Do you think military counselor doesn't care about you? Qilin sneered. Wu Mingzi was a think tank, and he was the youngest among the 10 of them. He was also an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. No force would complain about having too many of such people, but no force was destined to have too many of them. This also fostered his somewhat presumptuous character. Before Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyin cooperated, he was partial to Li Guangtu, and the two were still on good terms. What made Wu Mingzi most proud was that he had touched Phoenix's buttocks, but he was still alive. Although Phoenix was not the mistress of the purgatory of heaven capital at that time, Wu Mingzi had lived to the present, which had already proved his value and ability. Military counselor, humph, Wu Mingzi wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He knew his own value, but he would not overestimate it. Obviously, compared to the military counselor, he was not worth much. Obviously, compared with military counselor, he would not think that he was more important than military counselor even if he was crazy. In his sight, Han Xinyan walked up to Li Tianlan and whispered something to him. Li Tianlan nodded. The two walked up to them one after another. Your Majesty. Led by Li Huazhang, the 10 think tanks bowed slightly at the same time. A smile appeared on Li Tianlan's calm face. It's been a long time, uncles. His eyes fell on the only woman among the think tanks. And Aunt White Fox. The average-looking and a little fat White Fox smiled, and her eyes were a little uneasy. Welcome home, everyone. Li Tianlan said softly. White Fox's eyes were slightly relaxed, and the others also seemed relieved. Thank you, Your Majesty. Li Tianlan stood in front of them and did not move. He glanced at the think tanks in front of him one after another and narrowed his eyes slightly. I am very familiar with little uncle. He suddenly smiled. And the 3 uncles Qilin, Hupa, and One Eye. When they left the camp, I was 17 years old, and they watched me grow up. When Aunt White Fox left, I was 12 years old, and I still remember. I also remember the 3 uncles Spirit Monkey, Baiyue, and Shi Xian. Oh, if I remember correctly, my first wooden sword when I was a child was made by Uncle Spirit Monkey. At that time, I thought the wooden sword was very ugly. Standing in the corner, Spirit Monkey smiled. He was the oldest among them. His hair was already gray, and there were even some age spots on his face. Li Tianlan looked at him and nodded. Then he looked at a few strange figures. These are... Li Huazhang took a step forward and said softly, you are not familiar with these people. These 2 are Qianji and Qianzhong. You should have heard of them. Qianji and Qianzhong. They were a pair of brothers. They followed Li Guangtu to East Island at the very beginning. Li Tianlan had not even seen them before today. Li Tianlan nodded and said calmly, welcome home. Qianji and Qianzhong bowed at the same time and said nothing. This is John Doe, and he is, John Doe? Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted Li Huazhang's introduction. Wearing a Taoist robe and smiling, John Doe's eyelids twitched slightly. Li Huazhang was also slightly stunned. Li Tianlan laughed. Unexpectedly, he took the initiative to reach out his hand. I've heard a lot about you. John Doe was stunned for about 2 seconds. Then he reached out his hand reflexively and shook hands with Li Tianlan. He said with a smile, Your Majesty, you're too kind, it's not serious. Li Tianlan's tone was very sincere. You may not know this, but I've heard of you a few years ago. You left a deep impression on me. At that time. Well, it should be before the chaos in Snow Country broke out. No, even before the final maneuver of the 2 academies, John Doe seemed to suddenly think of something. His eyes suddenly changed, and his face also became a little pale. Without warning, he suddenly thought of the time point that Li Tianlan mentioned. To be exact, it was a period of time before that time point. At that time, no one knew that Li Tianlan had rebuilt his foundation in the polar region. No one even knew where Li Tianlan was. He suddenly thought of what he had done at that time. It's a waste of talent like you to come to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan patted John Doe with the other hand. John Doe forced a smile. Your Majesty, you're welcome, I mean it, Li Tianlan said softly. I don't dare to delay your talent. Emperor Dong's palace is small and can't accommodate you, so I plan to send you to a place that is most suitable for you to display your talent. You're welcome. He patted John Doe's palm with his hand. Bang! Amidst a very subtle but extremely shocking sound, Wu Mingzi's entire arm completely exploded without any warning. Blood and muscles burst out like fireworks under the stimulation of the sword energy, bursting through the skin. John Doe's eyes instantly became extremely frightened. Li Tianlan still held his hand and gave it a casual tug. Crack, the extremely dense sound completely broke out in John Doe's body. His body standing in front of Li Tianlan seemed to lose all support in an instant. His whole body directly collapsed to the ground like a mass of rotten meat. Li Tianlan looked calm. This time it seemed to be a very simple pull, but the huge force had completely shattered all the bones and muscles in John Doe's body in an instant. Li Huazhang opened his mouth. Before he could react, when everyone, including Nameless C himself, had yet to react, John Doe died. Chapter 13-14. There was a dead silence in the reception room. Everyone's figure was completely frozen where they were. It happened so suddenly that the so-called witnesses didn't even have the emotion of fear. They stood there quietly, showing only numbness. What's wrong? What happened? Wu Mingzi's body folded up layer by layer and slumped to the ground, looking like a piece of clothing that had been casually folded together. Today, experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were really no different from nonentities in Li Tianlan's eyes. With a casual pat and pull, everything in Wu Mingzi's body had been completely shattered. The huge force with the sword energy completely exploded in Wu Mingzi's body like countless bombs, breaking blood vessels, muscles, bones, and internal organs. Blood directly broke through the skin under the huge pressure and gushed out of every corner of the body like a fountain. Wu Mingzi's body was already dead. But it all happened too fast. So his consciousness still stayed for a short time. He felt that his eyes slid down quickly, from looking at Li Tianlan's face, and finally, he could only see Li Tianlan's shoes. He saw everything in his body squeezed out of his skin, and the red color kept gushing out, but none of it fell on Li Tianlan. The sword energy rotated gently in the void and turned into a cage, completely sealing his body and blood. Wu Mingzi's consciousness became more and more stiff. His eyes moved with difficulty. The moment the extremely strong regret and panic emerged, endless darkness surged and swallowed everything. Li Tianlan looked down at Wu Mingzi's vitality and consciousness completely dissipating. His calm eyes were filled with infinite indifference. The think tanks headed by Li Huazhang were as still as sculptures. Han Xinyan, with a folder in her arms and her long hair fluttering, was also stunned. Li Tianlan entered the reception room. She went up to him. The two of them just said one sentence. The think tanks didn't hear what Han Xinyan said. When she walked up to Li Tianlan, she said, "I don't like that Daoist very much." Han Xinyan always felt that the Daoist's eyes were a little wretched and obscene. Compared with other people who had their own thoughts, the Daoist's eyes always swept over her chest, calves, and neck, intentionally or unintentionally, again and again. Any woman would be very sensitive to this kind of gaze. Although Han Xinyan didn't say anything, she said it directly in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan said, then, that Daoist was dead. Wasn't this reaction a little too intense? Han Xinyan suddenly felt that she had become Qin Weibai. The think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was now standing here, and it was no longer just a simple think tank. They were the first batch of people to seek refuge in Emperor Dong's palace. They were the veterans of the Li family, which meant too many things. It was related to the so-called hearts of the people, the so-called overall situation, and even the future. How could such a person be killed? How could he kill him so easily? Han Xinyan really didn't think she had the power to make Li Tianlan kill someone just because she said she didn't like him. Moreover, the person he killed was someone who had contributed to the Li family to some extent. Qin Weibai was the only one who could do that. But now, Li Tianlan really did it. It was clean and neat. Wu Mingzi died without any chance to struggle. Han Xinyan was a little perturbed. She pursed her lips tightly. This was a complicated feeling of, I treat you as my boss, but you want to fuck me. You, Li Huazhang finally reacted. The muscles on his face kept trembling. He raised his hand and pointed at Li Tianlan. His mind was in a mess. His consciousness understood what had happened, but he didn't know what to say at all. No one knew how long it had been. Li Huazhang, whose face was red, suddenly roared, "Bastard! Tianlan, do you know that Wu Mingzi?" "I know what you said, little uncle." Li Tianlan looked down at his palm and frowned. Han Xinyan took a wet towel from the tea table next to her and wiped Li Tianlan's palm obediently. Li Huazhang's momentum stagnated, and he became more and more angry. They all knew Wu Mingzi's shortcomings. He was flamboyant, and sometimes his means were indeed cruel and even had no bottom line. But this was only to the enemy. He was fond of women. He had touched phoenixes but before. He had also touched many beautiful women in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and he had played with many women outside the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Wu Mingzi's behavior was indeed absurd, but he was absolutely sincere to the Li family. So Li Huazhang and the others didn't like him, but they would never deny that he was one of them. He was indeed a little close to Li Guangtu, but what did that mean? Today's Emperor Dong's palace had completely surpassed the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital had been disbanded. Only Emperor Dong's palace was the orthodox of the Li family. The first batch of their think tanks came here, and there must be people with different ideas. It was a fact that they were realistic, disappointed with Li Guangtu, or even wanted to ride on his coattails. It was a fact that they all wanted to find their place in the current Emperor Dong's palace and find a place for their survival. But it was not only because Emperor Dong's palace was invincible now, but also because they recognized their identity and thought that they were part of the Li family, and even the Li family's heroes. Now they came to Emperor Dong's palace, saw the financial strength of Xianyuan City, saw their future living environment, and saw the future prospects of the Li family. All of this was beautiful. But under such beautiful circumstances, they stood in front of Li Tianlan, and he killed them just like that? Under such terrible pressure, was the beauty of Xianyuan City really so beautiful? Under such a beautiful appearance, was this place heaven or hell for the Li family? Li Huazhang's body began to tremble obviously. The blood all over his body seemed to be boiling and concentrated in his brain. The surging anger made Li Huazhang's expression become extremely ferocious. "Tell me. What did John Doe do to the Li family? Why did you kill him?" Li Tianlan glanced at him silently. The indifference in his eyes slowly dissipated, and his eyes swept from Li Huazhang to every think tank. "I'm actually not familiar with the Purgatory of Heaven capital," Li Tianlan said calmly. Li Huazhang looked at him and narrowed his eyes. "There are many people I know in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but there are more I don't know. As for the think tanks, I'm most familiar with 3. One Eye, Kylan, and Amber. I know they are the think tanks of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but I have never seen them in the actions of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When others report, they don't report the 3 of them, not even you, uncle." Li Tianlan said lightly, listening to the report of Emperor Dong's palace. "I often have an illusion that the think tanks of the Purgatory of Heaven capital seem to have only 4 people, Qianji, Qianzhong, John Doe, and White Fox. I've heard these 4 names the most. Whether it's the external expansion or the game with Emperor Dong's palace, the figures of these 4 people are very clear. On the contrary, the other people's sense of existence is very weak. John Doe was dead. Qianji, Qianzhong, and White Fox's scalp went numb. Was he going to settle the score after the fall?" Li Huazhang's heart shook, and he subconsciously stood in front of the people named by Li Tianlan. His body was tense, but then he relaxed a little dejectedly. "Uncle, you worry too much," Li Tianlan said. "If I wanted to kill them, they would have been dead long ago." He walked over the body of John Doe and sat down in front of the sofa. Han Xinyan seemed to have really become his personal secretary. She began to make tea for Li Tianlan and arranged the fruit plate and dried fruits. Li Tianlan casually grabbed the dried fruit plate and put it back. Han Xinyan didn't find the fruit opener. She hesitated, grabbed the dried fruit, bit the shell with her little white teeth, and put the flesh in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan didn't mind and ate it. Han Xinyan continued to bite the second one silently. Li Huazhang watched this scene silently and suddenly felt that John Dou's death was really not unreasonable. I can actually understand what Qianji Qianzhong did, and I can also understand what Aunt White Fox did. After all, Li Guangtu has the blood of the Li family flowing in his body. It can be said that you are inclined to him, and it's okay that you want the purgatory of heaven capital to control Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan smiled and said, "You approved of Li Guangtu and helped him a lot, but you gave him a chance, but he was useless. What else could he do? You came to Emperor Dong's palace today, and I welcome you with both hands. At least, this shows that even when you supported Li Guangtu, you didn't really regard me as an outsider of the Li family. You just don't want me to be the patriarch of the Li family, right?" Qianji and Qianzhong looked at each other. Qianji frowned. He actually didn't know Li Tianlan. They had never even been to the camp where the Li family was dormant, but Qianji hesitated and said softly, "Even if your majesty is not the blood of the Li family, you are raised by Senior Li. For the Li family, your majesty is naturally not an outsider." There was nothing more to say about this. In terms of blood relationship, they had no blood relationship with the Li family, but they thought that they were also members of the Li family. No one could deny this. If they did not, it was equivalent to slapping the faces of all the veterans who had no blood relationship with the Li family but had done a lot for the Li family. "I know." Li Tianlan said calmly, "You think that I'm also a member of the Li family, but I'm not suitable to be the patriarch. But in the eyes of some people, I not only don't deserve to be the patriarch, but also don't deserve to have anything to do with the Li family." Qianji and Qianzhong froze for a moment. Li Huazhang narrowed his eyes. "You mean John Dou? He once looked for the Wang family of Beihai." Li Tianlan's tone was cold. To be exact, he looked for Wang Xiaoyao. At that time, I had just come back from death in East Island and went to the Polar Land. John Dou thought it was an opportunity. He persuaded Wang Xiaoyao to drug Little Bai. After that, Wang Xiaoyao would get Little Bai, and the purgatory of heaven capital would get Samsara Palace. Li Huazhang's face changed dramatically. Everyone's face changed dramatically. Little Bai, she was the real hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's talent was undeniable. It was possible for him to reach this height at this age, and even everything in Emperor Dong's palace now, to put it bluntly, it was not given by the Li family. Because most of the Li family's power was in the purgatory of heaven capital. Everything in Emperor Dong's palace now was given by this hostess and Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan would never show mercy to anyone who dared to do anything to Qin Weibai. In this regard, he didn't care whether the other party was a hero of the Li family or not. How could it be? Li Huazhang muttered to himself. Li Tianlan didn't speak. "How do you know about this?" Li Huazhang suddenly asked. The period after Li Tianlan returned from the final battle of Heaven Capital, during that period, the purgatory of Heaven Capital was officially born, and the power of the Li family began to gather towards the purgatory of Heaven Capital. During that period, the relationship between the Dongqing clan and Li Tianlan was far less than it was now. During that period, Qin Weibai and Samsara Palace were Li Tianlan's biggest reliance. John Dou persuaded Wang Xiaoyao to drug Qin Weibai. If Wang Xiaoyao really succeeded, what would the consequences be? At that time, the master of Samsara Palace was still there. No, Li Huazhang's body suddenly shivered. Does Li Guangtu know about this? I don't know if he knows. Li Tianlan said coldly, but does it make sense? This idiot. Li Huazhang gnashed his teeth and said. He's not stupid at all. Li Tianlan sneered. John Dou was lustful, but he persuaded Wang Xiaoyao to drug Qin Weibai without any intention of getting involved. Obviously, he had a certain understanding of Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai had never been submissive. If Wang Xiaoyao was really persuaded, Qin Weibai would definitely destroy Wang Xiaoyao and the entire Wang family of Beihai at all costs. Wang Xiaoyao getting Qin Weibai was completely bullshit. At that time, the most likely thing was that Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai would fight to the death. The Wang family of Beihai would be injured, and Li Tianlan would lose all his reliance. After that, the purgatory of Heaven Capital, which was in full swing, could not only solve the threat of Li Tianlan, an outsider, but also tear a large piece of benefits from the Wang family of Beihai. It didn't matter whether Li Guangtu knew or not. The important thing was that once things got to that point, what could Li Guangtu do even if he didn't know? When it was time to take action, he would never hesitate. What John Doe used was just Wang Xiaoyao's admiration for Qin Weibai. It was just a try. If it succeeded, it would be the best. If it failed, there was no loss. Instead, he could plant a foreshadowing and bring it up again when the opportunity was right. It was Wang Xiaoyao who told Little Bai about this. I checked later. During that time, John Doe and Wang Xiaoyao did meet in private. The corner of Li Huazhang's mouth twitched, and he couldn't speak. Wang Xiaoyao would tell Qin Weibai about this, regardless of his personal character. At least it proved that Wang Xiaoyao was not stupid, or that he knew Qin Weibai's character very well and knew the consequences of doing so. After refusing John Doe, he took the initiative to tell Qin Weibai. This standard bootlicker behavior might not be unexpected to John Doe, but he didn't care. He was from the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Guangtu would protect him, and the Samsara Palace couldn't do anything to him. As for Li Tianlan, at that time, perhaps Li Tianlan was nothing in John Doe's heart. The main purpose of him bewitching Wang Xiaoyao was not even to get rid of the threat of Li Tianlan. It was just a matter of convenience. His main purpose at that time was actually the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai. It was just that he didn't expect Li Tianlan to grow so fast, and he didn't expect Li Guangtu to be so incompetent, so there were the current consequences. As for this being Wang Xiaoyao's framing, this possibility was just a thought. At that time, Wang Xiaoyao hadn't betrayed the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xiaoyao didn't need to deliberately torment a John Doe. If the two sides didn't meet, Wang Xiaoyao wouldn't even know the existence of this person. I don't know if he really wants to join Emperor Dong's palace or if he has other intentions. It doesn't matter. I didn't think of him before, but he came to me himself. Why can't I kill him? Li Tianlan opened his palm subconsciously. But not a single piece of fruit was placed in his palm. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at it. Han Xinyan stood beside him expressionlessly and looked at him with some hidden bitterness. Her thoughts seemed to be written on her face. You didn't kill John Doe for me. Why should I serve you? Li Tianlan smiled indifferently, turned his head, and said slowly, Now, is it time to get down to business? You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.